Part 3. The Witch's Heart Foreboding in Asgard. What happened afterwards is to the shame of the gods, and mortals may hardly speak of it. Gullveig the witch came into Asgard, for Heimdall might not forbid her entrance. She came within, and she had her seat amongst the Aesir and the Vanir. She walked through Asgard with a smile upon her face, and where she walked, and where she smiled, care and dire foreboding came. Those who felt the care and the foreboding most deeply were Bragi the poet and his wife, the fair and simple Iduna, she who gathered the apples that kept age from the dwellers in Asgard. Bragi ceased to tell his never-ending tale. Then one day, overcome by the fear and the foreboding that was creeping through Asgard, Iduna slipped down Yggdrasil, the world tree, and no one was left to pluck the apples with which the Aesir and the Vanir stayed their youth. Then were all the dwellers in Asgard in sore dismay. Strength and beauty began to fade from all. Thor found it hard to lift Mjolnir, his great hammer, and the flesh under Freya's necklace lost its white radiance. And still Gullveig the witch walked smiling through Asgard, although now she was hated by all. It was Odin and Frey who went in search of Iduna. She would have been found and brought back without delay if Frey had had with him the magic sword that he had bartered for Gerda. In his search he had to strive with one who guarded the lake wherein Iduna had hidden herself. Belai was the one he strove against. He overcame him in the end with a weapon made of stag's antlers. It was not then but later that Frey lamented the loss of his sword. It was when the riders of Muspel came against Asgard, and the Vanir, who might have prevailed not because of the loss of Frey's sword. They found Iduna, and they brought her back. But still, care and foreboding crept through Asgard, and it was known, too, that the witch Gullveig was changing the thoughts of the gods. At last, Odin had to judge Gullveig. He judged her and decreed her death. And only Gungnir, the spear of Odin, might slay Gullveig, who was not a mortal race. Odin hurled Gungnir. The spear went through Gullveig, but still she stood smiling at the gods. A second time Odin hurled his spear. A second time Gungnir pierced the witch. She stood livid as one dead, but fell not down. A third time Odin hurled his spear. And now, pierced for the third time, the witch gave a scream that made all Asgard shudder, and she fell in death on the ground. "I have slain in these halls where slaying is forbidden," Odin said. "Take now the corpse of Gullveig and burn it on the ramparts, so that no trace of the witch who has troubled us will remain in Asgard." They brought the corpse of Gullveig the witch out on the ramparts, and they lighted fires under the pile on which they laid her. And they called upon Hasvelgur to fan up the flame. Hasvelgur is the giant, who on heaven's edge sits, in the guise of an eagle, and the winds, it is said, rush down on the earth from his outspreading pinions. Far away was Loki when all this was being done. Often now he went from Asgard, and his journeys were to look upon that wondrous treasure that had passed from the keeping of the dwarf Andvari. It was Gullveig who had kept the imagination of that treasure within his mind. Now, when he came back and heard the whispers of what had been done, a rage flamed up within him. For Loki was one of those whose minds were being changed by the presence and the whispers of the witch Gullveig. His mind was being changed to hatred of the gods. Now he went to the place of Gullveig's burning. All her body was in ashes, but her heart had not been devoured by the flames. And Loki in his rage took the heart of the witch and ate it. Oh, black and direful was it in Asgard, the day that Loki ate the heart that the flames would not devour. Loki the betrayer. He stole Frigga's dress of falcon feathers, Then, as a falcon, he flew out of Asgard. Jotunheim was the place that he flew toward. The anger and the fierceness of the hawk was within Loki as he flew through the giant's realm. The heights and the chasms of that dread land made his spirits mount up like fire. He saw the whirlpools and the smoking mountains and had joy of these sights. Higher and higher he soared until, looking toward the south, he saw the flaming land of Muspelheim. Higher and higher still he soared. With his falcon's eyes he saw the gleam of Surtur's flaming sword. All the fire of Muspelheim and all the gloom of Jotunheim would one day be brought against Asgard and against Midgard. But Loki was no longer dismayed to think of the ruin of Asgard's beauty and the ruin of Midgard's promise. He hovered around one of the dwellings in Jotunheim. Why had he come to it? Because he had seen 2 of the women of that dwelling, and his rage against the Asinir and the Vanir was such that the ugliness and the evil of these women was pleasing to him. He hovered before the open door of the giant's house, and he looked upon those who were within. Geirröd, the most savage of all the giants, was there, and beside him, squatting on the ground, were his 2 evil and ugly daughters, Hjalp and Greip. They were big and bulky, black and rugged, with horses' teeth and hair that was like horses' manes. Hjalp was the uglier of the 2, if one could be said to be uglier than the other, for her nose was a yard long and her eyes were crooked. What were they talking about as they sat there, one scratching the other? Of Asgard and the dwellers in Asgard whom they hated. Thor was the one whom they hated most of all, and they were speaking of all they would like to do to him. "I would keep Thor bound in chains," said Geirröd the giant, "and I would beat him to death with my iron club." "I would grind his bones to powder," said Greip. "I would tear the flesh off his bones," said Hjalp. "Father, can you not catch this Thor and bring him to us alive?" "Not so long as he has his hammer, Mjolnir, and the gloves with which he grasps his hammer, and the belt that doubles his strength." "Oh, if we could catch him without his hammer and his belt and his gloves!" cried Hjalp and Grip together. At that moment they saw the falcon hovering before the door. They were eager now for something to hold and torment, and so the hearts of the 3 became set upon catching the falcon. They did not stir from the place where they were sitting, but they called the child Glap, who was swinging from the roof tree, and they bade him go out and try to catch the falcon. All concealed by the great leaves, the child Glap climbed up the ivy that was around the door. A falcon came hovering near. Then Glap caught it by the wings and fell down through the ivy, screaming and struggling as he was being beaten, and clawed and torn by the wings and the talons and the beak of the falcon. Geirröd and Greip and Hjalp rushed out and kept hold of the falcon. As the giant held him in his hands and looked him over, he knew that this was no bird creature. The eyes showed him to be of Alfheim or Asgard. The giant took him and shut him in a box till he would speak. Soon he tapped at the closed box, and when Geirröd opened it, Loki spoke to him. So glad was the savage giant to have one of the dwellers in Asgard in his power, that he and his daughters did nothing but laugh and chuckle to each other for days. And all this time they left Loki in the closed box to waste with hunger. When they opened the box again, Loki spoke to them. He told them he would do any injury to the dwellers in Asgard that would please them if they would let him go. "Will you bring Thor to us?" said Greip. "Will you bring Thor to us without his hammer, and without the gloves with which he grasps his hammer, and without his belt?" said Hjalp. "I will bring him to you if you will let me go," Loki said. "Thor is easily deceived, and I can bring him to you without his hammer and his belt and his gloves." "We will let you go, Loki," said the giant, "if you will swear by the gloom of Jotunheim that you will bring Thor to us as you say." Loki swore that he would do so by the gloom of Jotunheim. Yea, and by the fires of Muspelheim, he added. The giant and his daughters let him go, and he flew back to Asgard. He restored to Frigga her falcon dress. All blamed him for having stolen it, but when he told how he had been shut up without food in Geirrod's dwelling, those who judged him thought he had been punished enough for the theft. He spoke as before to the dwellers in Asgard, and the rage and hatred he had against them since he had eaten Gulveig's heart, he kept from bursting forth. He talked to Thor of the adventures they had together in Jotunheim. Thor would now roar with laughter when he talked of the time when he went as a bride to Thrym the giant. Loki was able to persuade him to make another journey to Jotunheim. "And I want to speak to you of what I saw in Geirrod's dwelling," he said. "I saw there the hair of Sif, your wife." "The hair of Sif, my wife?" said Thor in surprise. "Yes, the hair I once cut off from Sif's head," said Loki. "Geirrod was the one who found it when I cast it away. They light their hall with Sif's hair." "Oh yes, they don't need torches where Sif's hair is." "I should like to see it," said Thor. "Then pay Geirrod a visit," Loki replied. "But if you go to his house, you will have to go without your hammer, Mjolnir, and without your gloves and your belt." "Where will I leave Mjolnir and my gloves and my belt?" Thor asked. "Leave them in Valaskjalf, Odin's own dwelling," said cunning Loki. "Leave them there, and come to Geirrod's dwelling. Surely you will be well treated there." "Yes, I will leave them in Valaskjalf and go with you to Geirrod's dwelling," Thor said. Thor left his hammer, his gloves, and his belt in Valaskjalf. Then he and Loki went toward Jotunheim. When they were near the end of their journey, they came to a wide river, and with a young giant whom they met on the bank, they began to ford it. Suddenly, the river began to rise. Loki and the young giant would have been swept away, only Thor gripped both of them. Higher and higher the river rose, and rougher it became. Thor had to plant his feet firmly on the bottom, or he and the two he held would have been swept down by the flood. He struggled across, holding Loki and the young giant. A mountain ash grew out of the bank, and, while the two held to him, he grasped it with his hands. The river rose still higher, but Thor was able to draw Loki and the young giant to the bank, and then he himself scrambled up on it. Now looking up the river, he saw a sight that filled him with rage. A giantess was pouring a flood into it. This it was that was making the river rise and seethe. Thor pulled a rock out of the bank and hurled it at her. It struck her and flung her into the flood. Then she struggled out of the water and went yelping away. This giantess was Gialb, Geirrod's ugly and evil daughter. Nothing would do the young giant whom Thor had helped across, but that the pair would go and visit Grid, his mother, who lived in a cave in the hillside. Loki would not go, and was angered to hear that Thor thought of going. But Thor, seeing that the giant youth was friendly, was willing enough to go to Grid's dwelling. "Go then, but get soon to Geirrod's dwelling yonder." "I will wait for you there," said Loki. He watched Thor go up the hillside to Grid's cave. He waited until he saw Thor come back down the hillside and go toward Geirrod's dwelling. He watched Thor go into the house where, as he thought, death awaited him. Then, in a madness for what he had done, Loki, with his head drawn down on his shoulders, started running like a bird along the ground. Grid, the old giantess, was seated on the floor of the cave, grinding corn between two stones. "Who is it?" she said, as her son led Thor within. "One of the Aesir." "What giant do you go to injure now, Asa Thor?" "I go to injure no giant, old Grid," Thor replied. "Look upon me. Cannot you see that I have not Mjolnir? My mighty hammer with me, nor my belt, nor my gloves of iron? But where in Jotunheim do you go? To the house of a friendly giant, old Grid, to the house of Gereod. Gereod, a friendly giant? You are out of your wits, Asa Thor. Is he not out of his wits, my son? This one who saved you from the flood, as you say. Tell him of Gereod, old mother, said the giant youth. Do not go to his house, Asa Thor. Do not go to his house? My word has been given, and I should be a craven if I stayed away now, just because an old crone sitting at a quernstone tells me I am going into a trap. I will give you something that will help you, Asa Thor. Lucky for you, I am mistress of magical things. Take this staff in your hands. It is a staff of power and will stand you instead of Mjolnir. I will take it since you offer it in kindness, old dame, this worm-eaten staff. And take these mittens too. They will serve you for your gauntlets of iron. I will take them, since you offer them in kindness, old dame, these worn old mittens. And take this length of string. It will serve you for your belt of prowess. I will take it since you offer it in kindness, old dame, this ragged length of string. 'Tis well indeed for you, Asa Thor, that I am mistress of magical things. Thor put the worn length of string around his waist, and as he did, he knew that Grid, the old giantess, was indeed the mistress of magical things. For immediately he felt his strength augmented as when he put on his own belt of strength. He then drew on the mittens and took the staff that she gave him in his hands. He left the cave of Grid, the old giantess, and went to Gereod's dwelling. Loki was not there. It was then that Thor began to think that perhaps old Grid was right, and that a trap was being laid for him. No one was in the hall. He came out of the hall and into a great stone chamber, and he saw no one there either. But in the center of the stone chamber there was a stone seat, and Thor went to it and seated himself upon it. No sooner was he seated than the chair flew upwards. Thor would have been crushed against the stone roof, only that he held his staff up. So great was the power in the staff, so great was the strength that the string around him gave, that the chair was thrust downward. The stone chair crashed down upon the stone floor. There were horrible screams from under it. Thor lifted up the seat and saw two ugly, broken bodies there. The giant's daughters, Jaup and Grip, had hidden themselves under the chair to watch his death. But the stone that was to have crushed him against the ceiling had crushed them against the floor. Thor strode out of that chamber with his teeth set hard. A great fire was blazing in the hall, and standing beside that fire he saw Gereod, the long-armed giant. He held tongs into the fire. As Thor came toward him, he lifted up the tongs and flung from it a blazing wedge of iron. It whizzed straight toward Thor's forehead. Thor put up his hands and caught the blazing wedge of iron between the mittens that old Grid had given him. Quickly he hurled it back at Gereod. It struck the giant on the forehead and went blazing through him. Gereod crashed down into the fire, and the burning iron made a blaze all around him. And when Thor reached Grid's cave, he went there to restore to the old giantess the string, the mittens, and the staff of power she had given him. He saw the giant's dwelling in such a blaze that one would think the fires of Muspelheim were all around it. "Loki against the Aesir!" The Aesir were the guests of the Vanir in Frey's palace. The dwellers in Asgard met and feasted in friendship. Odin and Tyr were there, Vidar and Vali, Njord, Frey, Heimdall and Bragi. The Asinur and the Vanna were also Frigga, Freya, Iduna, Gerda, Skadi, Sif and Nanna. Thor and Loki were not at the feast, for they had left Asgard together. In Frey's palace the vessels were of shining gold. They made light for the table, and they moved of their own accord to serve those who were feasting. All was peace and friendship there, until Loki entered the feast hall. Frey, smiling a welcome, showed a bench to Loki. It was beside Bragi's and next to Freya's. Loki did not take the place. Instead, he shouted out, "Not beside Bragi will I sit." Not beside Bragi, the most craven of all the dwellers in Asgard. Bragi sprang up at that affront, but his wife, the mild Iduna, quieted his anger. Freya turned to Loki and reproved him for speaking injurious words at a feast. "Freya," said Loki, "why were you not so mild when Odor was with you? Would it not have been well to have been wifely with your husband, instead of breaking faith with him for the sake of a necklace that you craved of the giant women?" Amazement fell on all at the bitterness that was in Loki's words and looks. Tyr and Njord stood up from their seats. But then the voice of Odin was heard, and all was still for the words of the All-Father. "Take the place beside Vidar, my silent son, O Loki," said Odin, "and let thy tongue which drips bitterness be silent. All the Aesir and the Vanir listen to thy words, O Odin, as if thou wert always wise and just," Loki said. "But must we forget that thou didst bring war into the world when thou didst fling thy spear at the envoys of the Vanir? And didst thou not permit me to work craftily on the one who built the wall around Asgard for a price? Thou dost speak, O Odin, and all the Aesir and the Vanir listen to thee. But was it not thou who, thinking not of wisdom but of gold when a ransom had to be made, brought the witch Gulvig out of the cave where she stayed with the dwarf's treasure? Thou wert not always wise nor always just, O Odin, and we at the table here need not listen to thee as if always thou wert." Then Skadi, the wife of Njord, flung words at Loki. She spoke with all the fierceness of her giant blood. "Why should we not rise up and chase from the hall this chattering crow?" she said. "Skadi," said Loki, "remember that the ransom for thy father's death has not yet been paid. Thou wert glad to snatch a husband instead of it. Remember who it was that killed thy giant father. It was I, Loki. And no ransom have I paid thee for it, although thou hast come amongst us in Asgard." Then Loki fixed his eyes on Frey, the giver of the feast, and all knew that with bitter words he was about to assail him. But Tyr, the brave swordsman, rose up and said, "Not against Frey mayst thou speak, O Loki. Frey is generous. He is the one amongst us who spares the vanquished and frees the captive." "Cease speaking, Tyr," said Loki. "Thou mayst not always have a hand to hold that sword of thine. Remember this saying of mine in days to come." "Frey," said he, "because thou art the giver of the feast, they think I will not speak the truth about thee. But I am not to be bribed by a feast. Didst thou not send Skirnir to Gymer's dwelling to befool Gymer's flighty daughter? Didst thou not bribe him into frightening her into a marriage with thee, who, men say, wert the slayer of her brother? Yea, Frey, thou didst part with the charge, with the magic sword that thou shouldst have kept for the battle. Thou hadst cause to grieve when thou didst meet Beli by the lake." When he said this, all who were there of the Vanir rose up, their faces threatening Loki. "Sit still, ye Vanir," Loki railed. "If the Aesir are to bear the brunt of Jotunheim's and Muspelheim's war upon Asgard, it was your part to be the first or the last on Vigard's plain. But already ye have lost the battle for Asgard, for the weapon that was put into Frey's hands he bartered for Gerda the giantess. Ha! Surtur shall triumph over you because of Frey's bewitchment." In horror they looked at the one who could let his hatred speak of Surtur's triumph. "All would have laid hands on Loki." Only Odin's voice rang out. Then another appeared at the entrance of the feasting hall. It was Thor, with his hammer upon his shoulder, his gloves of iron on his hands, and his belt of prowess around him. He stood marking Loki with wrathful eyes. "Ha, Loki, betrayer!" he shouted. Thou didst plan to leave me dead in Geirrod's house, but now thou wilt meet death by the stroke of this hammer." His hands were raised to hurl Mjolnir, but the words that Odin spoke were heard. "Not in this hall may slaying be done, son Thor. Keep thy hands upon thy hammer." Then, shrinking from the wrath in the eyes of Thor, Loki passed out of the feast hall. He went beyond the walls of Asgard and crossed Bifrost, the rainbow bridge. And he cursed Bifrost, and longed to see the day when the armies of Muspelheim would break it down in their rush against Asgard. East of Midgard, there was a place more evil than any region in Jotunheim. It was Jarnvid, the Iron Wood. There dwelt witches who were the most foul of all witches, and they had a queen over them, a hag, mother of many sons who took upon themselves the shapes of wolves. Two of her sons were Skoll and Hati, who pursued Sol, the sun, and Mani, the moon. She had a third son, who was Manegarm, the wolf who was to be filled with the lifeblood of men, who was to swallow up the moon and stain the heavens and earth with blood. To Jarnvid, the Iron Wood, Loki made his way, and he wed one of the witches there, Angerboda, and they had children that took on dread shapes. Loki's offspring were the most terrible of the foes that were to come against the Aesir and the Vanir in the time that was called the Twilight of the Gods. The Valkyrie, against the time when the riders of Muspelheim with the giants and the evil powers of the underworld would bring on battle. Odin. All-Father was preparing a host of defenders for Asgard. They were not of the Aesir nor of the Vanir, they were of the race of mortal men, heroes chosen from amongst the slain on fields of battle in Midgard. To choose the heroes, and to give victory to those whom he willed to have victory, Odin had battle maidens that went to the fields of war. Beautiful were those battle maidens, and fearless, wise were they also, for to them Odin showed the runes of wisdom. Valkyries, choosers of the slain, they were named. Those who were chosen on the fields of the slain were called in Asgard the Einherjar. For them Odin made ready a great hall, Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain it was called. 540 doors had Valhalla, and out of each door 800 champions might pass. Every day the champions put on their armor and took their weapons down from the walls and went forth and battled with each other. All who were wounded were made whole again, and in peace and goodly fellowship they sat down to the feast that Odin prepared for them. Odin himself sat with his champions, drinking wine, but eating no meat. For meat the champions ate the flesh of the boar, Sahimnir. Every day the boar was killed and cooked, and every morning it was whole again. For drink they had the mead that was made from the milk of the goat, Hydron, the goat that browsed on the leaves of the tree, Laradir. And the Valkyries, the wise and fearless battle maidens, went amongst them, filling up the drinking horns with the heady mead. Youngest of all the battle maidens was Brynhild. Nevertheless, to her, Odin, All-Father had shown more of the runes of wisdom than he had shown to any of her sisters. And when the time came for Brynhild to journey down into Midgard, he gave her a swan feather dress, such as he had given before to the 3 Valkyrie sisters, Alvit, Olrun, and Hjadgrun. In the dazzling plumage of a swan, the young battle maiden flew down from Asgard. Not yet had she to go to the battlefields. Waters drew her, and as she waited on the will of the All-Father, she sought out a lake that had golden sands for its shore, and as a maiden bathed in it. Now there dwelt near this lake a young hero whose name was Agnar. And one day, as Agnar lay by the lake, he saw a swan with dazzling plumage fly down to it. And while she was in the reeds, the swan feather dress slipped off her, and Agnar beheld the swan change to a maiden. So bright was her hair, so strong and swift were all her movements, that he knew her for one of Odin's battle maidens. for one of those who give victory and choose the slain. Very daring was Agnar, and he set his mind upon capturing this battle maiden, even though he should bring on himself the wrath of Odin by doing it. He hid the swan feather dress that she had left in the reeds. When she came out of the water, she might not fly away. Agnar gave back to her the swan feather dress, but she had to promise that she would be his battle maiden. And as they talked together, the young Valkyrie saw in him a hero, that one from Asgard might help. Very brave and very noble was Agnar. Brynhild went with him as his battle maiden, and she told him much from the runes of wisdom that she knew, and she showed him that the All-Father's last hope was in the bravery of the heroes of the earth. With the chosen from the slain for his champions, he would make battle in defense of Asgard. Always Brynhild was with Agnar's battalions. Above the battles she hovered, her bright hair and flashing battle dress outshining the spears and swords and shields of the warriors. But the grey-beard King Helmgunr made war on the young Agnar. Odin favoured the grey-beard king, and to him he promised the victory. Brynhild knew the will of the All-Father. But to Agnar, not to Helmgunr, she gave the victory. Doomed was Brynhild on the instant she went against Odin's will. Never again might she come into Asgard. A mortal woman she was now, and the Norns began to spin the thread of her mortal destiny. Sorrowful was Odin, All-Father, that the wisest of his battle maidens might never appear in Asgard nor walk by the benches at the feasts of his champions in Valhalla. He rode down on Sleipnir to where Brynhild was, and when he came before her it was his and not her head that was bowed down, for she knew now that the world of men was paying a bitter price for the strength that Asgard would have in the last battle. The bravest and noblest were being taken from Midgard to fill up the ranks of Odin's champions. And Brynhild's heart was full of anger against the rulers of Asgard, and she cared no more to be of them. Odin looked on his unflinching battle maiden, and he said, "Is there aught thou wouldst have me bestow on thee in thy mortal life, Brynhild?" "Naught save this," Brynhild answered, "that in my mortal life no one but a man without fear, the bravest hero in the world, may claim me for wife." All-Father bowed his head in thought. "It shall be as thou hast asked," he said. "Only he who is without fear shall come near thee." Then, on the top of the mountain that is called Hindfell, he had a hall built that faced the south. 10 dwarfs built it of black stone, and when the hall was built, he put round it a wall of mounting and circling fire. More did Odin. All-Father, he took a thorn of the tree of sleep, and he put it into the flesh of the battle maiden. Then, with her helmet on her head and the breastmail of the Valkyrie upon her, he lifted Brynhild in his arms and carried her through the wall of mounting and circling fire. He laid her upon the couch that was within the hall. There she would lie in slumber until the hero who was without fear should ride through the flame and waken her to the life of a mortal woman. He took farewell of her, and he rode back to Asgard on Sleipnir. He might not foresee what fate would be hers as a mortal woman, but the fire he had left went mounting and circling around the hall that the dwarfs had built. For ages that fire would be a fence around where Brynhild, once a Valkyrie, lay in sleep. The children of Loki. The children of Loki and the witch Angerboda were not as the children of men. They were formless as water or air, or fire is formless. But it was given to each of them to take on the form that was most like to their own greed. Now the dwellers in Asgard knew that these powers of evil had been born into the world, and they thought it well that they should take on forms and appear before them in Asgard. So they sent one to Jarnvid, the Ironwood, bidding Loki bring before the gods the powers born of him and the witch Angerboda. So Loki came into Asgard once more, and his offspring took on forms and showed themselves to the gods. The first, whose greed was destruction, showed himself as a fearful wolf. Fenrir he was named. And the second, whose greed was slow destruction, showed itself as a serpent. Jörmungand it was called. The third, whose greed was for withering of all life, took on a form also. When the gods saw it, they were affrighted, for this had the form of a woman, and one side of her was that of a living woman, and the other side of her was that of a corpse. Fear ran through Asgard as this form was revealed, and as the name that went with it, Hela, was uttered. Far out of sight of the gods, Hela was thrust. Odin took her and hurled her down to the deeps that are below the world. He cast her down to Niflheim, where she took to herself power over the 9 regions. There, in the place that is lowest of all, Hela reigns. Her hall is Elvidnir. It is set round with high walls, and it has barred gates. Precipice is the threshold of that hall. Hunger is the table within it. Care is the bed, and burning anguish is the hanging of the chamber. Thor laid hold upon Jörmungand. He flung the serpent into the ocean that engirdles the world. But in the depths of the ocean, Jörmungand flourished. It grew and grew until it encircled the whole world, and men knew it as the Midgard serpent. Fenrir the wolf might not be seized upon by any of the Aesir. Fearfully he ranged through Asgard, and they were only able to bring him to the outer courts by promising to give him all the food he was able to eat. The Aesir shrank from feeding Fenrir, but Tyr, the brave swordsman, was willing to bring food to the wolf's lair. Every day he brought him huge provision and fed him with the point of his sword. The wolf grew and grew until he became monstrous and a terror in the minds of the dwellers in Asgard. At last, the gods in council considered it and decided that Fenrir must be bound. The chain that they would bind him with was called lading. In their own smithy, the gods made it, and its weight was greater than Thor's hammer. Not by force could the gods get the fetter upon Fenrir, so they sent Skirnir, the servant of Frey, to beguile the wolf into letting it go upon him. Skirnir came to his lair and stood near him, and he was dwarfed by the wolf's monstrous size. "How great may thy strength be, mighty one?" Skirnir asked. "Couldst thou break this chain easily? The gods would try thee." In scorn, Fenrir looked down on the fetter Skirnir dragged. In scorn he stood still, allowing lading to be placed upon him. Then, with an effort that was the least part of his strength, he stretched himself and broke the chain in 2. The gods were dismayed, but they took more iron, and with greater fires and mightier hammer blows they forged another fetter. Dromi, this one was called, and it was half again as strong as lading was. Skirnir the venturesome brought it to the wolf's lair, and in scorn Fenrir let the mightier chain be placed upon him. He shook himself, and the chain held. Then his eyes became fiery, and he stretched himself with a growl and a snarl. Dromi broke across, and Fenrir stood looking balefully at Skirnir. The gods saw that no chain they could forge would bind Fenrir, and they fell more and more into fear of him. They took counsel again, and they bethought them of the wonder-work the dwarfs had made for them, the spear Gungnir, the ship Skidbladnir, the hammer Mjolnir. Could the dwarfs be got to make the fetter to bind Fenrir? If they would do it, the gods would add to their domain. Skirnir went down to Svartheim with the message from Asgard. The dwarf chief swelled with pride to think that it was left to them to make the fetter that would bind Fenrir. "We dwarfs can make a fetter that will bind the wolf," he said. "Out of 6 things we will make it." "What are these 6 things?" Skirnir asked. "The roots of stones, the breath of a fish, the beards of women, the noise made by the footfalls of cats, the sinews of bears, the spittle of a bird." I have never heard the noise made by a cat's footfall, nor have I seen the roots of stones, nor the beards of women. But use what things you will, O helper of the gods. The chief brought his 6 things together, and the dwarfs in their smithy worked for days and nights. They forged a fetter that was named Gleipnir. Smooth and soft as a silken string it was. Skirnir brought it to Asgard and put it into the hands of the gods. Then a day came when the gods said that once again they should try to put a fetter upon Fenrir. But if he was to be bound, they would bind him far from Asgard. Lyngvi was an island that they often went to make sport, and they spoke of going there. Fenrir growled that he would go with them. He came, and he sported in his own terrible way. And then, as if it were to make more sport, one of the Aesir shook out the smooth cord and showed it to Fenrir. "It is stronger than you might think, mighty one," they said. "Will you not let it go upon you, that we may see you break it?" Fenrir out of his fiery eyes looked scorn upon them. "What fame would there be for me," he said, "in breaking such a binding?" They showed him that none in their company could break it, slender as it was. "Thou only art able to break it, mighty one," they said. "The cord is slender, but there may be an enchantment in it," Fenrir said. "Thou canst not break it, Fenrir, and we need not dread thee any more," the god said. Then was the wolf ravenous wrath, for he lived on the fear that he made in the minds of the gods. "I am loth to have this binding upon me," he said, "but if one of the Aesir will put his hand in my mouth as a pledge that I shall be freed of it, I will let ye put it on me." The gods looked wistfully on one another. It would be health to them all to have Fenrir bound, but who would lose his hand to have it done? One, and then another of the Aesir stepped backward. But not Tyr, the brave swordsman. He stepped to Fenrir and laid his left hand before those tremendous jaws. "Not thy left hand, thy sword hand, O Tyr," growled Fenrir, and Tyr put his sword hand into that terrible mouth. Then the cord Gleipnir was put upon Fenrir. With fiery eyes he watched the gods bind him. When the binding was on him, he stretched himself as before. He stretched himself to a monstrous size, but the binding did not break off him. Then with fury he snapped his jaws upon the hand, and Tyr's hand, the swordsman's hand, was torn off. But Fenrir was bound. They fixed a mighty chain to the fetter, and they passed the chain through a hole they bored through a great rock. The monstrous wolf made terrible efforts to break loose, but the rock and the chain and the fetter held. Then, seeing him secured, and to avenge the loss of Tyr's hand, the gods took Tyr's sword and drove it to the hilt through his underjaw. Horribly the wolf howled. Mightily the foam flowed down from his jaws. That foam flowing made a river that is called Von, a river of fury that flowed on until Ragnarök came, the twilight of the gods, Baldur's doom. In Asgard there were 2 places that meant strength and joy to the Aesir and the Vanir. One was the garden where grew the apples that Iduna gathered, and the other was the peace stead, where, in a palace called Breidablik, Baldur the well-beloved dwelt. In the peace stead no crime had ever been committed, no blood had ever been shed, no falseness had ever been spoken. Contentment came into the minds of all in Asgard when they thought upon this place. Ah, were it not that the peace stead was there, happy with Baldur's presence, the minds of the Aesir and the Vanir might have become gloomy and stern from thinking on the direful things that were arrayed against them. Baldur was beautiful. So beautiful was he, that all the white blossoms on the earth were called by his name. Baldur was happy. So happy was he that all the birds on the earth sang his name. So just and so wise was Baldur that the judgment he pronounced might never be altered. Nothing foul or unclean had ever come near where he had his dwelling. 'Tis Breidablik called, where Baldur the Fair hath built him a bower, in the land where I know least loathliness lies. Healing things were done in Baldur's stead. Tyr's wrist was healed of the wounds that Fenrir's fangs had made. And there Frey's mind became less troubled with the foreboding that Loki had filled it with when he railed at him about the bartering of his sword. Now, after Fenrir had been bound to the rock in the faraway island, the Aesir and the Vanir knew a while of contentment. They passed bright days in Baldur's stead, listening to the birds that made music there. And it was there that Bragi the poet wove into his never-ending story the tale of Thor's adventures amongst the giants. But even into Baldur's stead foreboding came. One day, little Hnossa, the child of Freya and the lost Odur, was brought there in such sorrow that no one outside could comfort her. Nanna, Baldur's gentle wife, took the child upon her lap and found ways of soothing her. Then Hnossa told of a dream that had filled her with fright. She had dreamt of Hela, the queen, that is half-living woman and half-corpse. In her dream, Hela had come into Asgard saying, "A lord of the Aesir, I must have to dwell with me in my realm beneath the earth." Hnossa had such fear from this dream that she had fallen into a deep sorrow. A silence fell upon all when the dream of Hnossa was told. Nanna looked wistfully at Odin. "All-Father." And Odin, looking at Frigga, saw that a fear had entered her breast. He left the peace stead and went to his watchtower, Hlidskjalf. He waited there till Hugin and Munin should come to him. Every day his 2 ravens flew through the world, and coming back to him told him of all that was happening. And now they might tell him of happenings that would let him guess if Hela had indeed turned her thoughts toward Asgard, or if she had the power to draw one down to her dismal abode. The ravens flew to him, and lighting one on each of his shoulders, told him of things that were being said up and down. Yggdrasil, the world tree. Ratatosk the squirrel was saying them, and Ratatosk had heard them from the brood of serpents that with Nidhogg the great dragon gnawed ever at the root of Yggdrasil. He told it to the eagle that sat ever on the topmost bough, that in Hela's habitation a bed was spread and a chair was left empty for some lordly comer. And hearing this, Odin thought that it were better that Fenrir the wolf should range ravenously through Asgard than that Hela should win one from amongst them to fill that chair and lie in that bed. He mounted Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, and rode down toward the abodes of the dead. For 3 days and 3 nights of silence and darkness he journeyed on. Once one of the hounds of Helheim broke loose and bayed upon Sleipnir's tracks. For a day and a night Garm the hound pursued them, and Odin smelled the blood that dripped from his monstrous jaws. At last he came to where, wrapped in their shrouds, a field of the dead lay. He dismounted from Sleipnir and called upon one to rise and speak with him. It was on Volva, a dead prophetess, he called, and when he pronounced her name, he uttered a rune that had the power to break the sleep of the dead. There was a groaning in the middle of where the shrouded ones lay. Then Odin cried, "Out! Arise, Volva, prophetess!" There was a stir in the middle of where the shrouded ones lay, and a head and shoulders were thrust up from amongst the dead. "Who calls on Volva, the prophetess? The rains have drenched my flesh, and the storms have shaken my bones for more seasons than the living know. No living voice has a right to call me from my sleep with the dead. It is Vegtam the Wanderer who calls. For whom is the bed prepared and the seat left empty in Hela's habitation? For Baldur, Odin's son, is the bed prepared and the seat left empty. Now, let me go back to my sleep with the dead." But now Odin saw beyond Volva's prophecy. "Who is it," he cried out, "that stands with unbowed head and that will not lament for Baldur? Answer, Volva, prophetess. Thou seest far, but thou canst not see clearly. Thou art Odin. I can see clearly, but I cannot see far. Now let me go back to my sleep with the dead." "Volva, prophetess," Odin cried out again, but the voice from amongst the shrouded ones said, "Thou canst not wake me any more until the fires of Muspelheim blaze above my head." Then there was silence in the field of the dead, and Odin turned Sleipnir, his steed, and for 4 days, through the gloom and silence, he journeyed back to Asgard. Frigga had felt the fear that Odin had felt. She looked toward Baldur, and the shade of Hela came between her and her son. But then she heard the birds sing in the peace. Stead, and she knew that none of all the things in the world would injure Baldur. And to make it sure, she went to all the things that could hurt him. And from each of them she took an oath that it would not injure Baldur, the well-beloved. She took an oath from fire and from water, from iron and from all metals, from earths and stones and great trees, from birds and beasts and creeping things, from poisons and diseases. Very readily they all gave the oath that they would work no injury on Baldur. Then when Frigga went back and told what she had accomplished, the gloom that had lain on Asgard lifted. Baldur would be spared to them. Hela might have a place prepared in her dark habitation, but neither fire, nor water, nor iron, nor any metals, nor earths, nor stones, nor great woods, nor birds, nor beasts, nor creeping things, nor poisons, nor diseases would help her to bring him down. Hela has no arms to draw you to her. The Aesir and the Vanir cried to Baldur. Hope was renewed for them, and they made games to honor Baldur. They had him stand in the peace stead, and they brought against him all the things that had sworn to leave him hurtless. And neither the battle-axe flung full at him, nor the stone out of the sling, nor the burning brand, nor the deluge of water would injure the beloved of Asgard. The Aesir and the Vanir laughed joyously to see these things fall harmlessly from him, while a throng came to join them in the games, dwarfs and friendly giants. But Loki the hater came in with that throng. He watched the games from afar. He saw the missiles and the weapons being flung, and he saw Baldur stand smiling and happy under the strokes of metal and stones and great woods. He wondered at the sight, but he knew that he might not ask the meaning of it from the ones who knew him. He changed his shape into that of an old woman, and he went amongst those who were making sport for Baldur. He spoke to dwarfs and friendly giants. "Go to Frigga and ask. Go to Frigga and ask," was all the answer Loki got from any of them. Then to Fensalir, Frigga's mansion, Loki went. He told those in the mansion that he was Groa, the old enchantress who was drawing out of Thor's head the fragments of a grindstone that a giant's throw had embedded in it. Frigga knew about Groa, and she praised the enchantress for what she had done. "Many fragments of the great grindstone have I taken out of Thor's head by the charms I know," said the pretended Groa. "Thor was so grateful that he brought back to me the husband that he once had carried off to the end of the earth. So overjoyed was I to find my husband restored that I forgot the rest of the charms, and I left some fragments of the stone in Thor's head." So Loki said, repeating a story that was true. "Now I remember the rest of the charm," he said, "and I can draw out the fragments of the stone that are left. But will you not tell me, O Queen, what is the meaning of the extraordinary things I saw the Aesir and the Vanir doing?" "I will tell you," said Frigga, looking kindly and happily at the pretended old woman. "They are hurling all manner of heavy and dangerous things at Baldur, my beloved son, and all Asgard cheers to see that neither metal nor stone nor great wood will hurt him." "But why will they not hurt him?" said the pretended enchantress. Because I have drawn an oath from all dangerous and threatening things to leave Balder hurtless, said Frigga. From all things, lady. Is there no thing in all the world that has not taken an oath to leave Balder hurtless? Well, indeed, there is one thing that has not taken the oath, but that thing is so small and weak that I passed it by without taking thought of it. What can it be, lady? The mistletoe that is without root or strength. It grows on the eastern side of Valhalla. I passed it by without drawing an oath from it. Surely you were not wrong to pass it by. What could the mistletoe, the rootless mistletoe, do against Balder? Saying this, the pretended enchantress hobbled off. But not far did the pretender go hobbling. He changed his gait and hurried to the eastern side of Valhalla. There, a great oak tree flourished, and out of a branch of it a little bush of mistletoe grew. Loki broke off a spray, and with it in his hand he went to where the Aesir and the Vanir were still playing games to honor Baldur. All were laughing as Loki drew near, for the giants and the dwarfs, the Asinur and the Vana, were all casting missiles. The giants threw too far, and the dwarfs could not throw far enough, while the Asinur and the Vana threw far and wide of the mark. In the midst of all that glee and gamesomeness, it was strange to see one standing joyless. But one stood so, and he was of the Aesir Herdur, Baldur's blind brother. "Why do you not enter the game?" said Loki to him in his changed voice. "I have no missile to throw at Baldur," Herdur said. "Take this and throw it," said Loki. "It is a twig of the mistletoe." "I cannot see to throw it," said Herdur. "I will guide your hand," said Loki. He put the twig of mistletoe in Herdur's hand, and he guided the hand for the throw. The twig flew toward Baldur. It struck him on the breast, and it pierced him. Then Baldur fell down with a deep groan. The Aesir and the Vanir, the dwarfs and the friendly giants, stood still in doubt and fear and amazement. Loki slipped away, and blind Herdur, from whose hand the twig of mistletoe had gone, stood quiet, not knowing that his throw had bereft Baldur of life. Then a wailing rose around the peace stead. It was from the Asinur and the Vana. Baldur was dead, and they began to lament him. And while they were lamenting him, the beloved of Asgard, Odin, came amongst them. "Hela has won our Baldur from us," Odin said to Frigga as they both bent over the body of their beloved son. "Nay, I will not say it," Frigga said. When the Aesir and the Vanir had won their senses back, the mother of Baldur went amongst them. "Who amongst you would win my love and goodwill?" she said. "Whoever would let him ride down to Hela's dark realm and ask the queen to take ransom for Baldur. It may be she will take it and let Baldur come back to us. Who amongst you will go? Odin's steed is ready for the journey." Then forth stepped Hermod the Nimble, the brother of Baldur. He mounted Sleipnir and turned the 8-legged steed down toward Hela's dark realm. For 9 days and 9 nights Hermod rode on. His way was through rugged glens, one deeper and darker than the other. He came to the river that is called Gjallar, and to the bridge across it that is all glittering with gold. The pale maid who guards the bridge spoke to him. "The hue of life is still on thee," said Modgudur, the pale maid. "Why dost thou journey down to Hela's deathly realm?" "I am Hermod," he said, "and I go to see if Hela will take ransom for Baldur." "Fearful is Hela's habitation for one to come to," said Modgudur, the pale maid. "All round it is a steep wall, that even thy steed might hardly leap. Its threshold is precipice, the bed therein is care, the table is hunger, the hanging of the chamber is burning anguish. It may be that Hela will take ransom for Baldur. If all things in the world still lament for Baldur, Hela will have to take ransom and let him go from her," said Modgudur, the pale maid that guards the glittering bridge. It is well then, for all things lament Baldur. I will go to her and make her take ransom. Thou mayest not pass until it is of a surety that all things still lament him. Go back to the world and make sure. If thou dost come to this glittering bridge and tell me that all things still lament Baldur, I will let thee pass, and Hela will have to hearken to thee. I will come back to thee, and thou, Modgudur, pale maid, wilt have to let me pass. Then I will let thee pass, said Modgudur. Joyously, Hermod turned Sleipnir and rode back through the rugged glens, each one less gloomy than the other. He reached the upper world, and saw that all things were still lamenting for Baldur. Joyously, Hermod rode onward. He met the Vanir in the middle of the world, and he told them the happy tidings. Then Hermod and the Vanir went through the world, seeking out each thing, and finding that each thing still wept for Baldur. But one day, Hermod came upon a crow that was sitting on the dead branch of a tree. The crow made no lament as he came near. She rose up and flew away, and Hermod followed her to make sure that she lamented for Baldur. He lost sight of her near a cave, and then, before the cave, he saw a hag with blackened teeth who raised no voice of lament. If thou art the crow that came flying here, make lament for Baldur, Hermod said. I, Thorkt, will make no lament for Baldur, the hag said. Let Hela keep what she holds. All things weep tears for Baldur, Hermod said. I will weep dry tears for him, said the hag. She hobbled into her cave, and as Hermod followed, a crow fluttered out. He knew that this was Thaukt, the evil hag, transformed. He followed her, and she went through the world croaking, Let Hela keep what she holds. Let Hela keep what she holds. Then Hermod knew that he might not ride to Hela's habitation. All things knew that there was one thing in the world that would not lament for Baldur. The Vanir came back to him, and with head bowed over Sleipnir's mane, Hermod rode into Asgard. Now the Aesir and the Vanir, knowing that no ransom would be taken for Baldur, and that the joy and content of Asgard were gone indeed, made ready his body for the burning. First, they covered Baldur's body with a rich robe, and each left beside it his most precious possession. Then they all took leave of him, kissing him upon the brow. But Nanna, his gentle wife, flung herself on his dead breast, and her heart broke, and she died of her grief. Then did the Aesir and the Vanir weep afresh, and they took the body of Nanna, and they placed it side by side with Baldur's. On his own great ship, Ringhorn, would Baldur be placed with Nanna beside him. Then the ship would be launched on the water, and all would be burned with fire. But it was found that none of the Aesir or the Vanir were able to launch Baldur's great ship. Hyrroken, a giantess, was sent for. She came mounted on a great wolf with twisted serpents for a bridle. 4 giants held fast the wolf when she alighted. She came to the ship, and with a single push she sent it into the sea. The rollers struck out fire as the ship dashed across them. Then, when it rode, the water fires mounted on the ship, and in the blaze of the fires one was seen bending over the body of Baldur and whispering into his ear. It was Odin, All-Father. Then he went down off the ship, and all the fires rose into a mighty burning. Speechlessly the Aesir and the Vanir watched with tears streaming down their faces, while all things lamented, crying, Baldur the Beautiful is dead, is dead. And what was it that Odin All-Father whispered to Baldur as he bent above him with the flames of the burning ship around? He whispered of a heaven above Asgard that Surtur's flames might not reach, and of a life that would come to beauty again after the world of men and the world of the gods had been searched through and through with fire. Loki's punishment The crow went flying toward the north, croaking as she flew, "Let Hela keep what she holds. Let Hela keep what she holds." That crow was the hag Thor transformed, and the hag Thocht was Loki. He flew to the north and came into the wastes of Jotunheim. As a crow he lived there, hiding himself from the wrath of the gods. He told the giants that the time had come for them to build the ship Naglfar, the ship that was to be built out of the nails of dead men, and that was to sail to Asgard on the day of Ragnarok, with the giant Grimer steering it. And hearkening to what he said, the giants then and there began to build Naglfar, the ship that gods and men wished to remain unbuilt for long. Then Loki, tiring of the wastes of Jotunheim, flew to the burning south. As a lizard, he lived amongst the rocks of Muspelheim, and he made the fire giants rejoice when he told them of the loss of Frey's sword and of Tyr's right hand. But still in Asgard there was one who wept for Loki Siguna, his wife. Although he had left her and had shown his hatred for her, Siguna wept for her evil husband. He left Muspelheim as he had left Jotunheim, and he came to live in the world of men. He knew that he had now come into a place where the wrath of the gods might find him, and so he made plans to be ever ready for escape. He had come to the river where, ages before, he had slain the otter that was the son of the enchanter. And on the very rock where the otter had eaten the salmon on the day of his killing, Loki built his house. He made 4 doors to it so that he might see in every direction. And the power that he kept for himself was the power of transforming himself into a salmon. Often as a salmon he swam in the river, but even for the fishes that swam beside him, Loki had hatred. Out of flax and yarn he wove a net, that men might have the means of taking them out of the water. The wrath that the gods had against Loki did not pass away. It was he who, as Thocht, the hag, had given Hela the power to keep Baldur unransomed. It was he who had put into Hodur's hand the sprig of mistletoe that had bereft Baldur of life. Empty was Asgard, now that Baldur lived no more in the Peacestead, and stern and gloomy grew the minds of the Aesir and the Vanir with thinking on the direful things that were arrayed against them. Odin, in his hall of Valhalla, thought only of the ways by which he could bring heroes to him to be his help in defending Asgard. The gods searched through the world, and they found at last the place where Loki had made his dwelling. He was weaving the net to take fishes when he saw them coming from 4 directions. He threw the net into the fire so that it was burnt, and he sprang into the river and transformed himself into a salmon. When the gods entered his dwelling, they found only the burnt-out fire, but there was one amongst them who could understand all that he saw. In the ashes were the marks of the burnt net, and he knew that these were the tracing of something to catch fishes, and from the marks left in the ashes he made a net that was the same as the one Loki had burnt. With it in their hands the gods went down the river, dragging the net through the water. Loki was affrighted to find the thing of his own weaving brought against him. He lay between 2 stones at the bottom of the river, and the net passed over him. But the gods knew that the net had touched something at the bottom. They fastened weights to it, and they dragged the net through the river again. Loki knew that he might not escape it this time, and he rose in the water and swam toward the sea. The gods caught sight of him as he leaped over a waterfall. They followed him, dragging the net. Thor waded behind, ready to seize him should he turn back. Loki came out at the mouth of the river, and behold! There was a great eagle hovering over the waves of the sea and ready to swoop down on fishes. He turned back in the river. He made a leap that took him over the net that the gods were dragging. But Thor was behind the net, and he caught the salmon in his powerful hands, and he held him for all the struggle that Loki made. No fish had ever struggled so before. Loki got himself free, all but his tail, but Thor held to the tail and brought him amongst the rocks and forced him to take on his proper form. He was in the hands of those whose wrath was strong against him. They brought him to a cavern, and they bound him to 3 sharp-pointed rocks. With cords that were made of the sinews of wolves they bound him, and they transformed the cords into iron bands. There they would have left Loki bound and helpless. But Skadi, with her fierce giant blood, was not content that he should be left untormented. She found a serpent that had deadly venom, and she hung this serpent above Loki's head. The drops of venom fell upon him, bringing him anguish drop by drop, minute by minute. So Loki's torture went on. But Siguna, with the pitying heart, came to his relief. She exiled herself from Asgard and endured the darkness and the cold of the cavern, that she might take some of the torment away from him who was her husband. Over Loki Siguna stood, holding in her hands a cup into which fell the serpent's venom, thus sparing him from the full measure of anguish. Now and then Siguna had to turn aside to spill out the flowing cup, and then the drops of venom fell upon Loki, and he screamed in agony, twisting in his bonds. It was then that men felt the earth quake. There in his bonds Loki stayed until the coming of Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. Part 4. The Sword of the Volsungs and the Twilight of the Gods. Sigurd's youth in Midgard, in a northern kingdom, a king reigned whose name was Alv. He was wise and good, and he had in his house a foster son whose name was Sigurd. Sigurd was fearless and strong. So fearless and so strong was he that he once captured a bear of the forest and drove him to the king's hall. His mother's name was Hiordis. Once, before Sigurd was born, Alvind, his father, who was king before him, went on an expedition across the sea and came into another country. While they were yet afar off, they heard the din of a great battle. They came to the battlefield, but they found no living warriors on it, only heaps of slain. One warrior they marked. He was white-bearded and old, and yet he seemed the noblest-looking man Alf or his father had ever looked on. His arm showed that he was a king amongst one of the bands of warriors. They went through the forest, searching for survivors of the battle. And, hidden in a dell in the forest, they came upon 2 women. One was tall, with blue, unflinching eyes and ruddy hair, but wearing the garb of a serving-maid. The other wore the rich dress of a queen, but she was of low stature, and her manner was covert and shrinking. When Alv and his father drew near, the one who had on her the raiment of a queen said, "Help us, lords, and protect us, and we will show you where a treasure is hidden. A great battle has been fought between the men of King Line and the men of King Sigmund, and the men of King Linja have won the victory and have gone from the field. But King Sigmund is slain, and we who are of his household hid his treasure, and we can show it to you." The noble warrior, white-haired and white-bearded, who lies yonder, is he, King Sigmund? The woman answered, "Yes, lord, and I am his queen." "We have heard of King Sigmund," said Alv's father. "His fame and the fame of his race, the Volsungs, is over the wide world." Alv said no word to either of the women, but his eye stayed on the one who had on the garb of a serving-maid. She was on her knees, wrapping in a beast's skin 2 pieces of a broken sword. "You will surely protect us, good lords," said she who had on the queenly dress. "Yea, wife of King Sigmund, we will protect you and your serving-maid," said Alv's father, the old king. Then the women took the warriors to a wild place on the seashore, and they showed them where King Sigmund's treasure was hidden amongst the rocks, cups of gold and mighty arm rings, and jeweled collars. Prince Alv and his father put the treasure on the ship and brought the 2 women aboard. Then they sailed from the land. That was before Sigurd, the foster son of King Alv, was born, Now the mother of Alv was wise, and little of what she saw escaped her noting. She saw that of the two women that her son and her husband had brought into their kingdom, the one who wore the dress of the serving maid had unflinching eyes and a high beauty, while the one who wore the queenly dress was shrinking and unstately. One night, when all the women of the household were sitting round her, spinning wool by the light of torches in the hall, the Queen Mother said to the one who wore the queenly garb, "Thou art good at rising in the morning. How dost thou know in the dark hours when it wears to dawn?" The one clad in the queenly garb said, "When I was young, I used to rise to milk the cows, and I waken ever since at the same hour." The Queen Mother said to herself, "It is a strange country in which the royal maids rise to milk the cows." Then she said to the one who wore the clothes of the serving maid, "How dost thou know in the dark hours when the dawn is coming?" "My father," she said, "gave me the ring of gold that I wear, and always before it is time to rise, I feel it grow cold on my finger." "It is a strange country, truly," said the Queen Mother to herself, "in which the serving maids wear rings of gold." When all the others had left, she spoke to the two women who had been brought into her country. To the one who wore the clothes of a serving maid, she said, "Thou art the queen." Then the one who wore the queenly clothes said, "Thou art right, lady. She is the queen, and I cannot any longer pretend to be other than I am." Then the other woman spoke. Said she, "I am the queen, as thou hast said, the queen of King Sigmund, who was slain. Because a king sought for me, I changed clothes with my serving maid, my wish being to baffle those who might be sent to carry me away. Know that I am Hiordis, a king's daughter. Many men came to my father to ask for me in marriage, and of those that came there were two whom I heard much of. One was King Lidni, and the other was King Sigmund of the race of the Volsungs. The king, my father, told me it was for me to choose between these two. Now King Sigmund was old, but he was the most famous warrior in the whole world, and I chose him rather than King Ligni. We were wed. But King Ligni did not lose desire of me, and in a while he came against King Sigmund's kingdom with a great army of men. We hid our treasure by the seashore, and I and my maid watched the battle from the borders of the forest. With the help of Gram, his wondrous sword, and his own great warrior strength, Sigmund was able to harry the great force that came against him. But suddenly he was stricken down. Then was the battle lost. Only King Ligni's men survived it, and they scattered to search for me and the treasure of the king. I came to where my lord lay on the field of battle, and he raised himself on his shield when I came, and he told me that death was very near him. A stranger had entered the battle at the time when it seemed that the men of King Ligni must draw away. With the spear that he held in his hand, he struck at Sigmund's sword, and Gram, the wondrous sword, was broken in 2 pieces. Then did King Sigmund get his death wound. "It must be, I shall die," he said, "for the spear against which my sword broke was Gungnir, Odin's spear. Only that spear could have shattered the sword that Odin gave my fathers. Now must I go to Valhalla, Odin's hall of heroes." "I weep," I said, "because I have no son who might call himself of the great race of the Volsungs." "For that you need not weep," said Sigmund. "A son will be born to you, my son and yours, and you shall name him Sigurd. Take now the broken pieces of my wondrous sword and give them to my son when he shall be of warrior age." Then did Sigmund turn his face to the ground, and the death struggle came on him. Odin's Valkyrie took his spirit from the battlefield, and I lifted up the broken pieces of the sword, and with my serving maid I went and hid in a deep dell in the forest. Then your husband and your son found us, and they brought us to your kingdom, where we have been kindly treated, O Queen." Such was the history that Hjordis, the wife of King Sigmund, told to the mother of Prince Alv. Soon afterwards, the child was born to her that was Sigmund's son. Sigurd, she named him. And after Sigurd was born, the old king died, and Prince Alv became king in his stead. He married Hjordis, she of the ruddy hair, the unflinching ways, and the high beauty, and he brought up her son Sigurd in his house as his foster son. Sigurd, the son of Sigmund, before he came to warrior's age, was known for his strength and his swiftness, and for the fearlessness that shone round him like a glow. Mighty was the race he sprang from, the Volsung race, men said. But Sigurd would be as mighty as any that have gone before him. He built himself a hut in the forest, that he might hunt wild beasts and live near to one who was to train him in many crafts. This one was Regin, a maker of swords and a cunning man besides. It was said of Regin that he was an enchanter, and that he had been in the world for longer than the generations of men. No one remembered, nor no one's father remembered, when Regin had come into that country. He taught Sigurd the art of working in metals, and he taught him, too, the lore of other days. But ever as he taught him, he looked at Sigurd strangely, not as a man looks at his fellow, but as a lynx looks at a stronger beast. One day Regin said to young Sigurd, "King Alv has thy father's treasure, men say, and yet he treats thee as if thou wert thrall-born." Now Sigurd knew that Regin said this, that he might anger him and thereafter use him to his own ends. He said, "King Alv is a wise and a good king, and he would let me have riches if I had need of them. Thou dost go about as a footboy, and not as a king's son. Any day that it likes me, I might have a horse to ride," Sigurd said. "So thou dost say," said Regin, and he turned from Sigurd and went to blow the fire of his smithy. Sigurd was made angry, and he threw down the irons on which he was working, and he ran to the horse pastures by the great river. A herd of horses was there, grey and black and roan and chestnut, the best of the horses that King Alv possessed. As he came near to where the herd grazed, he saw a stranger near, an ancient but robust man, wearing a strange cloak of blue and leaning on a staff to watch the horses. Sigurd, though young, had seen kings in their halls, but this man had a bearing that was more lofty than any king's he had ever looked on. "Thou art going to choose a horse for thyself," said the stranger to Sigurd. "Yea, father," Sigurd said. "Drive the herd first into the river," the stranger said. Sigurd drove the horses into the wide river. Some were swept down by the current. Others struggled back and clambered up the bank of the pastures, but one swam across the river and, throwing up his head, neighed as for a victory. Sigurd marked him. A grey horse he was, young and proud, with a great flowing mane. He went through the water and caught this horse, mounted him, and brought him back across the river. "Thou hast done well," said the stranger. "Grani, whom thou hast got, is of the breed of Sleipnir, the horse of Odin." "And I am of the race of the sons of Odin," cried Sigurd, his eyes wide and shining with the very light of the sun. "I am of the race of the sons of Odin, for my father was Sigmund, and his father was Volsung, and his father was Rerir, and his father was Sigi, who was the son of Odin." The stranger, leaning on his staff, looked on the youth steadily. Only one of his eyes was to be seen, but that eye, Sigurd thought, might see through a stone. "All thou hast named," the stranger said, "were as swords of Odin to send men to Valhalla, Odin's hall of heroes. And of all that thou hast named, there were none but were chosen by Odin's Valkyries for battles in Asgard," cried Sigurd. Too much of what is brave and noble in the world is taken by Odin for his battles in Asgard." The stranger leaned on his staff, and his head was bowed. "What wouldst thou?" he said, and it did not seem to Sigurd that he spoke to him. "What wouldst thou? The leaves wither and fall off Yggdrasil, and the day of Ragnarok comes." Then he raised his head and spoke to Sigurd. "The time is near," he said, "when thou mayest possess thyself of the pieces of thy father's sword." Then the man in the strange cloak of blue went climbing up the hill, and Sigurd watched him pass away from his sight. He had held back Grani, his proud horse, but now he turned him and let him gallop along the river in a race that was as swift as the wind. The sword! Gram and the dragon Fafnir, mounted upon Grani, his proud horse Sigurd rode to the hall and showed himself to Alv, the king, and to Hiordis, his mother. Before the hall he shouted out the Volsung name, and King Alv felt as he watched him that this youth was a match for a score of men, and Hiordis, his mother, saw the blue flame of his eyes, and thought to herself that his way through the world would be as the way of the eagle through the air. Having shown himself before the hall, Sigurd dismounted from Grani, and stroked and caressed him with his hands, and told him that now he might go back and take pasture with the herd. The proud horse breathed fondly over Sigurd and bounded away. Then Sigurd strode on until he came to the hut in the forest where he worked with the cunning smith Regin. No one was in the hut when he entered, but over the anvil, in the smoke of the smithy fire, there was a work of Regin's hands. Sigurd looked upon it, and a hatred for the thing that was shown rose up in him. The work of Regin's hands was a shield, a great shield of iron. Hammered out on that shield and coloured with red and brown colours was the image of a dragon lengthening himself out of a cave. Sigurd thought it was the image of the most hateful thing in the world, and the light of the smithy fire falling on it, and the smoke of the smithy fire rising round it, made it seem verily a dragon living in his own element of fire and reek. While he was still gazing on the loathly image, Regin, the cunning smith, came into the smithy. He stood by the wall, and he watched Sigurd. His back was bent, his hair fell over his eyes that were all fiery, and he looked like a beast that runs behind the hedges. "Aye, thou dost look on Fafnir the dragon, son of the Volsungs," he said to Sigurd. "Mayhap it is thou who wilt slay him. I would not strive with such a beast." "He is all horrible to me," Sigurd said. "With a good sword thou mightst slay him, and win for thyself more renown than ever thy fathers had," Regin whispered. "I shall win renown as my fathers won renown, in battle with men and in conquest of kingdoms," Sigurd said. "Thou art not a true Volsung, or thou wouldst gladly go where most danger and dread is," said Regin. "Thou hast heard of Fafnir the dragon, whose image I have wrought here. If thou dost ride to the crest of the hills, thou mayest look across to the desolate land where Fafnir has his haunt. Know that once it was fair land where men had peace and prosperity, but Fafnir came and made his den in a cave nearby, and his breathings, as he went to and came from the river, withered up the land and made it the barren waste that men called Nita Heath. Now, if thou art a true Volsung, thou wilt slay the dragon, and let that land become fair again, and bring the people back to it, and so add to King Alv's domain." "I have naught to do with the slaying of dragons," Sigurd said. "I have to make war on King Ligni, and avenge upon him the slaying of Sigmund my father." "What is the slaying of Ligni and the conquest of his kingdom to the slaying of Fafnir the dragon?" Regin cried. "I will tell thee what no one else knows of Fafnir the dragon. He guards a hoard of gold and jewels, the like of which was never seen in the world. All this hoard you can make yours by slaying him." "I do not covet riches," Sigurd said. "No riches is like to the riches that Fafnir guards. His hoard is the hoard that the dwarf Anvari had from the world's early days. Once the gods themselves paid it over as a ransom, and if thou wilt win this hoard, thou wilt be as one of the gods." "How dost thou know that of which thou speakst, Regin?" Sigurd said. "I know, and one day I may tell thee how I know, and one day I may hearken to thee. But speak to me no more of this dragon. I would have thee make a sword that will be mightier and better shapen than any sword in the world. Thou canst do this, Regin, for thou art accounted the best swordsmith amongst men." Regin looked at Sigurd out of his small and cunning eyes, and he thought it was best to make himself active. So he took the weightiest pieces of iron and put them into his furnace, and he brought out the secret tools that he used when a masterwork was claimed from his hands. All day Sigurd worked beside him, keeping the fire at its best glow and bringing water to cool the blade as it was fashioned and refashioned. And as he worked he thought only about the blade and about how he would make war upon King Ligni and avenge the man who was slain before he himself was born. All day he thought only of war and of the beaten blade, but at night his dreams were not upon wars nor shapen blades, but upon Fafnir the dragon. He saw the heath that was left barren by his breath, and he saw the cave where he had his den, and he saw him crawling down from his cave, his scales glittering like rings of mail, and his length the length of a company of men on the march. The next day he worked with Regin to shape the great sword. When it was shapen with all the cunning Regin knew, it looked indeed a mighty sword. Then Regin sharpened it, and Sigurd polished it, and at last he held the great sword by its iron hilt. Then Sigurd took the shield that had the image of Fafnir the dragon upon it, and he put the shield over the anvil of the smithy. Raising the great sword in both his hands, he struck full on the iron shield. The stroke of the sword sheared away some of the shield, but the blade broke in Sigurd's hands. Then in anger he turned on Regin, crying out, "Thou hast made a knave sword for me, to work with thee again. Now must make me a Volsung's sword." Then he went out and called to Grani, his horse, and mounted him and rode to the river bank like the sweep of the wind. Regin took more pieces of iron and began to forge a new sword, uttering as he worked runes that were about the hoard that Fafnir the dragon guarded. And Sigurd that night dreamt of glittering treasure that he coveted not, masses of gold and heaps of glistening jewels. He was Regin's help the next day, and they both worked to make a sword that would be mightier than the first. For 3 days they worked upon it, and then Regin put into Sigurd's hands a sword sharpened and polished. That was mightier and more splendid looking than the one that had been forged before. And again Sigurd took the shield that had the image of the dragon upon it, and he put it upon the anvil. Then he raised his arms and struck his full blow. The sword cut through the shield, but when it struck the anvil, it shivered in his hands. He left the smithy angrily and called to Grani, his proud horse. He mounted and rode on like the sweep of the wind. Later he came to his mother's bower and stood before Hiordis. "A greater sword must I have," said he, "than one that is made of metal dug out of the earth. The time has come, mother, when thou must put into my hands the broken pieces of Gram, the sword of Sigmund and the Volsungs." Hiordis measured him with the glance of her eyes, and she saw that her son was a mighty youth, and one fit to use the sword of Sigmund and the Volsungs. She bade him go with her to the king's hall. Out of the great stone chest that was in her chamber, she took the beast's skin and the broken blade that was wrapped in it. She gave the pieces into the hands of her son. "Behold the halves of Gram," she said, "of Gram. the mighty sword that in the far-off days Odin left in the Branstock, in the tree of the house of Volsung. I would see Gramnu shapen in thy hands, my son. Then she embraced him as she had never embraced him before, and standing there with her ruddy hair about her, she told him of the glory of Gram, and of the deeds of his fathers, in whose hands the sword had shone. Then Sigurd went to the smithy, and he wakened Regin out of his sleep, and he made him look on the shining halves of Sigmund's sword. He commanded him to make out of these halves a sword for his hand. Regin worked for days in his smithy, and Sigurd never left his side. At last the blade was forged, and when Sigurd held it in his hand, fire ran along the edge of it. Again he laid the shield that had the image of the dragon upon it on the anvil of the smithy. Again, with his hands on its iron hilt, he raised the sword for a full stroke. He struck, and the sword cut through the shield and sheared through the anvil, cutting away its iron horn. Then did Sigurd know that he had in his hands the Volsung's sword. He went without and called to Grani, and like the sweep of the wind rode down to the river's bank. Shreds of wool were floating down the water. Sigurd struck at them with his sword, and the fine wool was divided against the water's edge. Hardness and fineness, Gram could cut through both. That night, Gram, the Volsung's sword, was under his head when he slept, but still his dreams were filled with images that he had not regarded in the daytime. The shine of a hoard that he coveted not, and the gleam of the scales of a dragon that was too loathly for him to battle with. The dragon's blood. Sigurd went to war. With the men that King Alv gave him, he marched into the country that was ruled over by the slayer of his father. The war that he waged was short, and the battles that he won were not perilous. Old was King Ligni now, and feeble was his grasp upon his people. Sigurd slew him and took away his treasure and added his lands to the lands of King Alv. But Sigurd was not content with the victory he had gained. He had dreamt of stark battles and of renown that would be hardily won. What was the war he had waged to the wars that Sigmund his father, and Volsung his father's father, had waged in their days? Not content was Sigurd. He led his men back by the hills, from the crests of which he could look upon the dragon's haunts. And having come as far as those hills, he bade his men return to King Alv's hall with the spoils he had won. They went, and Sigurd stayed upon the hills and looked across Nita Heath to where Fafnir the dragon had his lair. All blasted and wasted was the heath with the fiery breath of the dragon. And he saw the cave where Fafnir abode, and he saw the track that his comings and goings made. For every day the dragon left his cave in the cliffs, crossing the heath to come to the river at which he drank. For the length of a day Sigurd watched from the hills the haunt of the dragon. In the evening he saw him lengthening himself out of the cave and coming on his track across the heath, in seeming like a ship that travels swiftly because of its many oars. Then to Regin in his smithy he came. To that cunning man Sigurd said, "Tell me all thou dost know of Fafnir the dragon." Regin began to talk, but his speech was old and strange and filled with runes. When he had spoken it all, Sigurd said, "All thou hast told me thou wilt have to say over again in a speech that is known to men of our day." Then said Regin, "Of a hoard I spoke. The dwarf Andvari guarded it from the first days of the world, but one of the Aesir forced Andvari to give the hoard to him, masses of gold and heaps of jewels, and the Aesir gave it to Hreidmar, who was my father. For the slaying of his son Otter, the Aesir gave the hoard to Hreidmar, the greatest hoard that had ever been seen in the world. But not long was it left to Hreidmar to gloat over, for a son slew a father that he might possess that hoard. Fafnir, that son, was Fafnir my brother. Then Fafnir, that no one might disturb his possession of the hoard, turned himself into a dragon so fearful that none dare come nigh him. And I, Regin, was stricken with covetousness of the hoard. I did not change myself into another being, but by the magic my father knew, I made my life longer than the generations of men, hoping that I would see Fafnir slain and then have the mighty hoard under my hands. Now, son of the Volsungs, thou dost know all that has to do with Fafnir the dragon, and the great hoard that he guards. Little do I care about the hoard he guards, Sigurd said. I care only that he has made the king's good lands into a waste, and that he is an evil thing to men. I would have the renown of slaying Fafnir the dragon. With Gram the sword thou hast, thou couldst slay Fafnir? Regin cried, his body shaken with his passion for the hoard. Thou couldst slay him with the sword thou hast. Hearken now, and I will tell thee how thou mightst give him the deathly stroke through the coils of his mail. Hearken, for I have thought of it all. The track of the dragon to the river is broad, for he takes ever the one track. Dig a pit in the middle of that track, and when Fafnir comes over it, strike up into his coils of mail with Gram, thy great sword. Gram only may pierce that mail. Then will Fafnir be slain, and the hoard will be left guardless. What thou sayest is wise, Regin, Sigurd answered. We will make this pit, and I will strike Fafnir in the way thou sayest. Then Sigurd went, and he rode upon Grani, his proud horse, and he showed himself to King Alv and to Hiordis his mother. Afterwards he went with Regin to the heath that was the haunt of the dragon, and in his track they dug a pit for the slaying of Fafnir. And, lest his horse should scream aloud at the coming of the dragon, Sigurd had Grani sent back to a cave in the hills. It was Regin that brought Grani away. I am fearful and can do nothing to help thee, son of the Volsungs, he said. I will go away and await the slaying of Fafnir. He went, and Sigurd lay down in the pit they had made and practiced thrusting upward with his sword. He lay with his face upward, and with his 2 hands he thrust the mighty sword upward. But as he lay there, he bethought of a dread thing that might happen, namely, that the blood and the venom of the dragon might pour over him as he lay there, and waste him flesh and bone. When he thought of this, Sigurd hastened out of the pit, and he dug other pits nearby. And he made a passage for himself from one pit to the other, that he might escape from the flow of the dragon's envenomed blood. As he lay down again in the pit, he heard the treading of the dragon, and he heard the dragon's strange and mournful cry. Mightily the dragon came on, and he heard his breathing. His shape came over the pit. Then the dragon held his head and looked down on Sigurd. It was the instant for him to make stroke with Gram. He did not let the instant pass. He struck mightily under the shoulder and toward the heart of the beast. The sword went through the hard and glittering scales that were the creature's mail. Sigurd pulled out the sword and drew himself through the passage and out into the second pit as Fafnir's envenomed blood drenched where he had been. Drawing himself up out of the second pit, he saw the huge shape of Fafnir heaving and lashing. He came to him and thrust his sword right through the dragon's neck. The dragon reared up as though to fling himself down on Sigurd with all his crushing bulk and dread talons, with his fiery breath and his envenomed blood. But Sigurd leaped aside and ran far off. Then did Fafnir scream his death scream. After he had torn up rocks with his talons, he lay prone on the ground, his head in the pit that was filled with his envenomed blood. Then did Regin, hearing the scream that let him know that Fafnir was slain, come down to where the battle had been fought. When he saw that Sigurd was alive and unharmed, he uttered a cry of fury, for his plan had been to have Sigurd drowned and burnt in the pit with the stream of Fafnir's envenomed blood. But he mastered his fury and showed a pleased countenance to Sigurd. "Now thou wilt have renown," he cried. "Forever wilt thou be called Sigurd, Fafnir's bane. More renown than ever any of thy fathers had wilt thou have, O Prince of the Volsungs." So he spoke, saying fair words to him, for now that he was left alive there was something he would have Sigurd do. "Fafnir is slain," Sigurd said, "and the triumph over him was not lightly won. Now may I show myself to King Alv and to my mother, and the gold from Fafnir's hoard will make me a great spoil." "Wait," said Regin cunningly, "wait. Thou hast yet to do something for me. With the sword thou hast cut through the dragon and take out his heart for me. When thou hast taken it out, roast it, that I may eat of it and become wiser than I am. Do this for me who showed thee how to slay Fafnir." Sigurd did what Regin would have him do. He cut out the heart of the dragon and he hung it from stakes to roast. Regin drew away and left him. As Sigurd stood before the fire, putting sticks upon it, there was a great silence in the forest. He put his hand down to turn an ashen branch into the heart of the fire. As he did, a drop from the roasting dragon heart fell upon his hand. The drop burnt into him. He put his hand to his mouth to ease the smart, and his tongue tasted the burning blood of the dragon. He went to gather wood for the fire. In a clearing that he came to, there were birds. He saw 4 on a branch together. They spoke to each other in birds, notes, and Sigurd heard and knew what they were saying. Said the first bird, "How simple is he who has come into this dell. He has no thought of an enemy, and yet he who was with him but a while ago has gone away, that he may bring a spear to slay him. For the sake of the gold that is in the dragon's cave, he would slay him," said the second bird. And the third bird said, "If he would eat the dragon's heart himself, he would know all wisdom." But the fourth bird said, "He has tasted a drop of the dragon's blood, and he knows what we are saying." The 4 birds did not fly away, nor cease from speaking. Instead, they began to tell of a marvelous abode that was known to them. Deep in the forest, the birds sang. There was a hall that was called the House of Flame. Its 10 walls were Uni, Iri, Bari, Ori, Vans, Vegdrasil, Derry, Yuri, Dellinger, Atvada, and each wall was built by the dwarf whose name it bore. All round the hall there was a circle of fire through which none might pass, and within the hall a maiden slept, and she was the wisest and the bravest and the most beautiful maiden in the world. Sigurd stood like a man enchanted, listening to what the birds sang, but suddenly they changed the flow of their discourse, and their notes became sharp and piercing. "Look, look!" cried one. "He is coming against the youth." "He is coming against the youth with a spear," cried another. "Now will the youth be slain unless he is swift," cried a third. Sigurd turned round, and he saw Regin treading the way toward him, grim and silent, with a spear in his hands. The spear would have gone through Sigurd had he stayed 1 instant longer in the place where he had been listening to the speech of the birds. As he turned, he had his sword in his hand, and he flung it, and Gram struck Regin on the breast. Then Regin cried out, "I die! I die without having laid my hands on the hoard that Fafnir guarded." Ah, a curse was upon the hoard, for Hoitmar and Fafnir and I have perished because of it. May the curse of the gold now fall on the one who is my slayer. Then did Regin breathe out his life. Sigurd took the body and cast it into the pit that was alongside the dead Fafnir. Then, that he might eat the dragon's heart and become the wisest of men, he went to where he had left it roasting. And he thought that when he had eaten the heart, he would go into the dragon's cave and carry away the treasure that was there, and bring it as spoil of his battle to King Alv and to his mother. Then he would go through the forest and find the house of flame where slept the maiden who was the wisest and bravest and most beautiful in the world. But Sigurd did not eat the dragon's heart. When he came to where he had left it roasting, he found that the fire had burnt it utterly. The story of Sigmund and Signy. He called to Grani, his proud horse. He stood up on a mound in the heath, and he sent forth a great shout. And Grani heard in the cave where Regin had left him, and he came galloping to Sigurd with flowing mane and eyes flashing fire. He mounted Grani, and he rode to Fafnir's cave. When he went into the place where the dragon was wont to lie, he saw a door of iron before him. With Gram, his mighty sword, he hewed through the iron, and with his strong hands he pulled the door back. Then, before him, he saw the treasure the dragon guarded, masses of gold and heaps of shining jewels. But as he looked on the hoard, Sigurd felt some shadow of the evil that lay over it all. This was the hoard that in the far-off days the river maidens watched over as it lay deep under the flowing water. Then Andvari the dwarf forced the river maidens to give it to him. And Loki had taken it from Andvari, letting loose as he did Golvig the witch, who had such evil power over the gods. For the sake of the hoard, Fafnir had slain Horidmar, his father, and Regin had plotted death against Fafnir, his brother. Not all this history did Sigurd know, but a shadow of its evil touched his spirit as he stood there before the gleaming and glittering heap. He would take all of it away, but not now. The tale that the birds told was in his mind, and the green of the forest was more to him than the glitter of the treasure heap. He would come back with chests and load it up and carry it to King Alv's hall. But first he would take such things as he himself might wear. He found a helmet of gold, and he put it on his head. He found a great armring, and he put it around his arm. On the top of the armring there was a small fingering, with a rune graved upon it. Sigurd put it on his finger. And this was the ring that Andvari the dwarf had put the curse upon when Loki had taken the hoard from him. He knew that no one would cross the heath and come to Fafnir's lair, so he did not fear to leave the treasure unguarded. He mounted Grani, his proud horse, and rode toward the forest. He would seek the house of flame where she lay sleeping, the maiden who was the wisest and the bravest and the most beautiful in the world. With his golden helmet shining above his golden hair, Sigurd rode on. As he rode toward the forest, he thought of Sigmund, his father, whose slaying he had avenged, and he thought of Sigmund's father, Volsung, and of the grim deeds that the Volsungs had suffered and wrought. Rerir, the son of Sigi, who was the son of Odin, was the father of Volsung. And Volsung, when he was in his first manhood, had built his hall around a mighty tree. Its branches went up to the roof and made the beams of the house, and its great trunk was the center of the hall. The Branstock, the tree was called, and Volsung Hall was named the Hall of the Branstock. Many children had Volsung, 11 sons and 1 daughter. Strong were all his sons and good fighters, and Volsung of the Hall of the Branstock was a mighty chief. It was through Signy, the daughter of the house, that a feud and a deadly battle was brought to Volsung and his sons. She was a wise and a fair maiden, and her fame went through all the lands. Now, one day, Volsung received a message from a king asking for the hand of Signy in marriage. And Volsung, who knew of this king through report of his battles, sent a message to him saying that he would be welcome to the Hall of the Branstock. So King Siggeir came with his men. But when the Volsungs looked into his face, they liked it not. And Signy shrank away, saying, "This king is evil of heart and false of word." Volsung and his 11 sons took counsel together. Siggeir had a great force of men with him, and if they refused to give her, he could slay them all and harry their kingdom. Besides, they had pledged themselves to give Singi when they had sent him a message of welcome. Long counsel they had together. And 10 of Singi's brothers said, "Let Signy wed this king. He is not as evil as he seems in her mind." 10 brothers said it, but one spoke out, saying, "We will not give our sister to this evil king. Rather let us all go down fighting with the hall of the Branstock, flaming above our heads." It was Sigmund, the youngest of the Volsungs, who said this. But Signy's father said, "We know naught of evil of King Siggeir, also our word is given to him. Let him feast with us this night in the hall of the Branstock, and let Signy go from us with him as his wife." Then they looked to her, and they saw Signy's face, and it was white and stern. "Let it be as ye have said, my father and my brothers," she said. "I will wed King Siggeir and go with him overseas." So she said aloud, but Sigmund heard her say to herself, "It is woe for the Volsungs." A feast was made, and King Siggeir and his men came to the hall of the Branstock. Fires were lighted and tables were spread, and great horns of mead went around the guests. In the middle of the feasting, a stranger entered the hall. He was taller than the tallest there, and his bearing made all do him reverence. One offered him a horn of mead, and he drank it. Then, from under the blue cloak that he wore, he drew a sword that made the brightness of the hall more bright. He went to the tree that the hall was built around, to the Branstock, and he thrust the sword into it. All the company were hushed. Then they heard the voice of the stranger, a voice that was like the trumpet's call. "The sword is for the hand that can draw it out of the Branstock." Then he went out of the hall. All looked to where the sword was placed, and saw a hand's breadth of wonderful brightness. This one and that one would have laid hands on the hilt. Only Volsung's voice bade them stand still. "It is meet," he said, "that our guest and our son-in-law, King Siggeir, should be the first to put hands on its hilt and try to draw the sword of the stranger out of the Branstock." King Siggeir went to the tree and laid his hands on the broad hilt. He strove hard to draw out the sword, but all his might could not move it. As he strained himself to draw it and failed, a dark look of anger came into his face. Then others tried to draw it, the captains who were with King Siggeir, and they too failed to move the blade. Then Volsung tried, and Volsung could not move it. One after the other, his 11 sons strained to draw out the stranger's sword. At last it came to the turn of the youngest, to Sigmund, to try, and when Sigmund laid his hand on the broad hilt and drew it, behold, the sword came with his hand, and once again the hall was brightened with its marvelous brightness. It was a wondrous sword, a sword made out of better metal, and by smiths more cunning than any known. All envied Sigmund that he had won for himself that wonder weapon. King Siggeir looked on it with greedy eyes. "I will give thee its weight in gold for that sword, good brother," he said. But Sigmund said to him proudly, "If the sword was for thy hand, thou shouldst have won it. The sword was not for thine, but for a Volsung's hand." And Signy, looking at King Siggeir, saw a look of deeper evil come into his face. She knew that hatred for all the Volsung race was in his heart. But at the end of the feast, she was wed to King Siggeir, and the next day she left the hall of the Branstock and went with him down to where his great painted ship was drawn up on the beach. And when they were parting from her, her father and her brothers, King Siggeir invited them to come to his country, as friends visiting friends and kinsmen visiting kinsmen, and look on Sini again. And he stood on the beach, and would not go on board his ship until each and all of the Volsungs gave their word that they would visit Sini and him in his own land. "And when thou comest," he said to Sigmund, "be sure thou dost bring with thee the mighty sword that thou didst win." All this was thought of by Sigurd, the son of Sigmund, as he rode toward the fringe of the forest. The time came for Volsung and his sons to redeem the promise they made to King Siggeir. They made ready their ship, and they sailed from the land where stood the hall of the Bronstock, and they landed on the coast of King Siggeir's country. And they drew their ship up on the beach, and they made their camp there, intending to come to the king's hall in the broad light of the day. But in the half-light of the dawn, one came to the Volsung ship. A cloak and hood covered the figure, but Sigmund, who was the watcher, knew who it was. "Signy," he said, and Signy asked that her father and her brothers be awakened until she would speak to them of a treason that was brewed against them. "King Siggeir has made ready a great army against your coming," she told them. "He hates the Volsungs, the branch as well as the root, and it is his plan to fall upon you, my father and my brothers, with his great army and slay you all. And he would possess himself of Gram, Sigmund's wonder sword. Therefore I say to you, O Volsungs, draw your ship into the sea and sail from the land where such treachery can be." But Volsung, her father, would not listen. "The Volsungs do not depart like broken men from a land they have brought their ship to," he said. "We gave, each and all, the word that we would visit King Siggeir, and visit him we will. And if he is a dastard and would fall upon us, why, we are the unbeaten Volsungs, and we will fight against him and his army, and slay him, and bear you back with us to the hall of the Branstock. The day widens now, and we shall go to the hall." Signy would have spoken of the great army King Siggeir had gathered, but she knew that the Volsungs never hearkened to talk of odds. She spoke no more, but bowed her head and went back to King Siggeir's hall. Siggeir knew that Signy had been to warn her father and her brothers. He called the men he had gathered, and he posted them cunningly in the way the Volsungs would come. Then he sent one to the ship with a message of welcome. As they left their ship, the army of King Siggeir fell upon the Volsungs and their followers. Very fierce was the battle that was waged on the beach, and many one of King Siggeir's fierce fighters went down before the fearless ones that made Volsung's company. But at last Volsung himself was slain, and his 11 sons were taken captive. And Gram, his mighty sword, was taken out of Sigmund's hands. They were brought before King Siggeir in his hall, the 11 Volsung princes. Siggeir laughed to see them before him. "Ye are not in the hall of the Branstock now, to dishonor me with black looks and scornful words," he said. "And a harder task will be given you than that of drawing a sword out of a tree trunk. Before set of sun, I will see you hewn to pieces with the sword." Then Signy, who was there, stood up with her white face and her wide eyes, and she said, "I pray not for longer life for my brothers, for well I know that my prayers would avail them naught. But dost thou not heed the proverb, Siggeir, sweet to the eye as long as the eye can see?" And Siggeir laughed his evil laugh when he heard her. "Aye, my queen," he said, "sweet to the eye as long as the eye may see their torments. They shall not die at once nor all together. I will let them see each other die." So Siggeir gave a new order to his dastard troops. The order was that the 11 brothers should be taken into the depths of the forest and chained to great beams and left there. This was done with the 11 sons of Volsung. The next day, one who had watched and who was faithful to Signy came, and Signy said to him, "What has befallen my brothers?" And the watcher said, "A great wolf came to where the chained men are, and fell upon the first of them and devoured him." When Signy heard this, no tears came from her eyes, but that which was hard around her heart became harder. She said, "Go again, and watch what befalls." And the watcher came the second time and said, "The second of your brothers has been devoured by the wolf." Sini shed no tears this time either, and again that which was hard around her heart became harder. And every day the watcher came, and he told her what had befallen her brothers. And it came to the time when but one of her brothers was left alive, Sigmund, the youngest. Then said Signy, "Not without device are we left at the end. I have thought of what is to be done. Take a pot of honey to where he is chained and smear Sigmund's face with the honey." The watcher did as Signy bade him. Again the great wolf came along the forest ways to where Sigmund was chained. When she snuffed over him, she found the honey upon his face. She put down her tongue to lick over his face. Then, with his strong teeth, Sigmund seized the tongue of the wolf. She fought, and she struggled with all her might, but Sigmund did not let go of her tongue. The struggle with the beast broke the beam to which he was chained. Then Sigmund seized the wolf with his hands and tore her jaws apart. The watcher saw this happening and told of it to Signy. A fierce joy went through her, and she said, "One of the Volsungs lives, and vengeance will be wrought upon King Siggeir and upon his house." Still the watcher stayed in the ways of the forest, and he marked where Sigmund built for himself a hidden hut. Often he bore tokens from Signy to Sigmund. Sigmund took to the ways of the hunter and the outlaw, but he did not forsake the forest, and King Siggeir knew not that one of the Volsungs lived and was near him. The story of Sigmund. And Sinfjotli. As Sigurd rode the ways of the forest, he thought upon Sigmund, his father, on his life and his death, according to what Hiordis, his mother, had told him. Sigmund lived for long the life of the hunter and the outlaw, but he never strayed far from the forest that was in King Siggeir's dominion. Often did he get a token from Signy. They too, the last of the Volsungs, knew that King Siggeir and his house would have to perish for the treason he had wrought on their father and their brothers. Sigmund knew that his sister would send her son to help him. One morning there came to his hut a boy of 10 years. He knew that this was one of Signy's sons, and that she would have him train him into being a warrior worthy of the Volsung breed. Sigmund hardly looked and hardly spoke to the lad. He was going hunting, and as he took down his spear from the wall, he said, "There is the meal bag, boy. Mix the meal and make the bread, and we will eat when I come back." When he returned, the bread was unmade, and the boy was standing watching the meal bag with widened eyes. "Thou didst not make the bread?" Sigmund said. "Nay," said the boy, "I was afeard to go near the bag." Something stirred within it. "Thou hast the heart of a mouse, so to be frighted. Go back to thy mother and tell her that not in thee is the stuff for a Volsung warrior." So Sigmund spoke, and the boy went away weeping. A year later, another son of Signy's came. As before, Sigmund hardly looked at and hardly spoke to the boy. He said, "There is the meal bag. Mix the meal and make ready the bread against the time I return." When Sigmund came back, the bread was unmade. The boy had shrunk away from where the bag was. "Thou hast not made the bread?" Sigmund said. "Nay," said the boy, "something stirred in the bag, and I was afeard." "Thou hast the heart of a mouse. Get thee back to thy mother and tell her that there is not in thee the stuff for the making of a Volsung warrior." And this boy, like his brother, went back weeping. At that time Signy had no other sons, but at last one was born to her, the child of a desperate thought. Him, too, when he was grown, she sent to Sigmund. "What did thy mother say to thee?" Sigmund said to this boy when he showed himself at the hut. "Nothing. She sewed my gloves to my hands and then bade me pull them off." "And didst thou?" "Aye, and the skin came with them." "And didst thou weep?" "A Volsung does not weep for such a thing." Long did Sigmund look on the lad. He was tall and fair and great-limbed, and his eyes had no fear in them. "What wouldst thou have me do for thee?" said the lad. "There is the meal bag," Sigmund said. "Mix the meal and make the bread for me against the time I return." When Sigmund came back, the bread was baking on the coals. "What didst thou with the meal?" Sigmund asked. "I mixed it. Something was in the meal. A serpent? I think, but I kneaded it with the meal, and now the serpent is baking on the coals." Sigmund laughed and threw his arms around the boy. "Thou wilt not eat of that bread," he said. "Thou didst knead into it a venomous serpent." The boy's name was Sinfiotli. Sigmund trained him in the ways of the hunter and the outlaw. Here and there they went, taking vengeance on King Siggeir's men. The boy was fierce, but never did he speak a word that was false. One day, when Sigmund and Sinfiotli were hunting, they came upon a strange house in the dark wood. When they went within, they found two men lying there sleeping a deep sleep. On their arms were heavy rings of gold, and Sigmund knew that they were the sons of kings. And beside the sleeping men, he saw wolf skins, left there as though they had been cast off. Then Sigmund knew that these men were shape changers, that they were ones who changed their shapes and ranged through the forests as wolves. Sigmund and Sinfiotli put on the skins that the men had cast off, and when they did this, they changed their shapes and became as wolves. And as wolves, they ranged through the forest, now and then changing their shapes back to those of men. As wolves, they fell upon King Siggeir's men and slew more and more of them. One day, Sigmund said to Sinfiotli, "Thou art still young, and I would not have thee be too rash. If thou dost come upon a company of 7 men, fight them. But if thou dost come on a company greater than 7, raise up thy voice as a wolf's cry, and bring me to thy side." Sinfiotli promised that he would do this. One day, as he went through the forest in his wolf shape, Sigmund heard the din of a struggle, and he stopped to listen for Sinfiotli's call. But no call came. Then Sigmund went through the forest in the direction of the struggle. On his way, he passed the bodies of 11 slain men, and he came upon Sinfiotli lying in the thicket, his wolf shape upon him, and panting from the battle he had waged. "Thou didst strive with 11 men. Why didst thou not call to me?" Sigmund said. "Why should I have called to thee? I am not so feeble, but I can strive with 11 men." Sigmund was made angry with this answer. He looked on Sinfiotli where he lay, and the wicked wolf's nature that was in the skin came over him. He sprang upon him, sinking his teeth in Sinfiotli's throat. Sinfiotli lay gasping in the throes of death. And Sigmund, knowing the deadly grip that was in those jaws of his, howled his anguish. Then, as he licked the face of his comrade, he saw 2 weasels meet. They began to fight, one with the other, and the first caught the second at the throat, and bit him with his teeth, and laid him out as if in death. Sigmund marked the combat and the end of it. But then the first weasel ran and found leaves of a certain herb, and he put them upon his comrade's wound. And the herb cured the wound, and the weasel that was bitten rose up and was sound and swift again. Sigmund went searching for the herb he saw the weasel carry to his comrade, and as he sought for it he saw a raven with a leaf in her beak. She dropped the leaf as he came to her, and behold, it was the same leaf as the weasel had brought to his comrade. Sigmund took it and laid it on the wound he had made in Sinfiotli's throat, and the wound healed. And Sinfiotli was sound once more. They went back to their hut in the forest, and the next day they burnt the wolfskins, and they prayed the gods that they might never be afflicted with the wolf's evil nature again. And Sigmund and Sinfiotli never afterwards changed their shapes. The story of the vengeance of the Volsungs and of the death of Sinfiotli. And now Sinfiotli had come to his full strength, and it was time to take vengeance on King Siggeir for the slaying of Volsung and the dread doom he had set for Volsung's 10 sons. Sigmund and Sinfjotli put helmets on their heads and took swords in their hands and went to King Siggeir's hall. They hid behind the casks of ale that were at the entrance, and they waited for the men-at-arms to leave the hall, that they might fall upon King Siggeir and his attendants. The younger children of King Siggeir were playing in the hall, and one let fall a ball. It went rolling behind the casks of ale, and the child, peering after the ball, saw two men crouching with swords in their hands and helmets on their heads. The child told a servant who told the king. Then Siggeir arose, and he drew his men-at-arms around him, and he set them on the men who were hiding behind the barrels. Sigmund and Sinfjotli sprang up and fought against the men of King Siggeir, but they were taken captives. Now they might not be slain there and then, for it was unlawful to slay captives after sunset. But for all that, King Siggeir would not leave them above ground. He decreed that they should be put in a pit, and a mound made over them, so that they would be buried alive. The sentence was carried out. A great flagstone was put down to divide the pit in two, so that Sigmund and Sinfjotli might hear each other struggle, and not be able to give help to each other. All was done as the king commanded, but while his thralls were putting sods over the pit, one came amongst them, cloaked and hooded, and dropped something wrapped in straw into the side of the pit where Sinfjotli lay. And when the sky was shut out from them with the turf and soil that was put over the pit, Sinfjotli shouted to Sigmund, "I shall not die, for the queen has thrown down to me meat wrapped in a parcel of straw." And a while afterwards Sinfjotli shouted to Sigmund, "The queen has left a sword in the meat which she flung down to me. It is a mighty sword. Almost, I think it is Gram, the sword you told me of." "If it be Gram," Sigmund said, "it is a sword that can cut through this flagstone. Thrust the blade against the stone and try." Sinfjotli thrust the blade against the stone, and the blade went through the stone. Then, one on each side, they took hold of the sword, and they cut the great stone in two. Afterwards, working together, it was easy to shift the turf and soil. The two came out under the sky. Before them was the hall of King Siggeir. They came to the hall, and they set dry wood before it, and they fired the wood and made the hall blaze up. And when the hall was in a blaze, King Siggeir came to the door and shouted, "Who is it that has fired the house of the king?" And Sigmund said, "I, Sigmund, the son of Volsung, that you may pay for the treason wrought on the Volsungs." Seeing Sigmund there with Gram, the great sword, in his hands, Siggeir went back into his hall. Then Signy was seen with her white face and her stern eyes, and Sigmund called to her, "Come forth, come forth." Sigmund calls, "Come out of Siggeir's blazing house, and together we will go back to the hall of the Branstock." But Signy said, "All is finished now. The vengeance is wrought, and I have no more to keep me in life. The Volsung race lives on in you, my brother, and that is my joy. Not merrily did I wed King Siggeir, and not merrily did I live with him, but merrily will I die with him now." She went within the hall. Then the flames burst over it, and all who were within perished. Thus the vengeance of the Volsungs was wrought. And Sigurd thought on the deed that Sigmund, his father, and Sinfjotli, the youth who was his father's kinsman, wrought as he rode the ways of the forest, and of the things that thereafter befell them. Sigmund and Sinfjotli left King Siggeir's land and came back to the land where was the hall of the Branstock. Sigmund became a great king, and Sinfjotli was the captain of his host. And the story of Sigmund and Sinfjotli goes on to tell how Sigmund wed a woman whose name was Borghild, and how Sinfjotli loved a woman who was loved by Borghild's brother. A battle came in which the youths were on opposite sides, and Sinfjotli killed Borghild's brother, and it was in fair combat. Sinfjotli returned home. To make peace between him and the queen, Sigmund gave Borghild a great measure of gold as compensation for the loss of her brother. The queen took it and said, "Lo, my brother's worth is reckoned at this. Let no more be said about his slaying." And she made Sinfiotli welcome to the hall of the Branstock. But although she showed herself friendly to him, her heart was set upon his destruction. That night there was a feast in the hall of the Branstock and Borghild. The queen went to all the guests with a horn of mead in her hand. She came to Sinfiotli, and she held the horn to him. "Take this from my hands, O friend of Sigmund," she said. But Sinfiotli saw what was in her eyes, and he said, "I will not drink from this horn. There is venom in the drink." Then, to end the mockery that the queen would have made over Sinfiotli, Sigmund, who was standing by, took the horn out of Borghild's hand. No venom or poison could injure him. He raised the horn to his lips and drained the mead at a draught. The queen said to Sinfiotli, "Must other men quaff thy drink for thee?" Later in the night, she came to him again, the horn of mead in her hand. She offered it to Sinfiotli, but he looked in her eyes and saw the hatred that was there. "Venom is in the drink," he said. "I will not take it." And again Sigmund took the horn and drank the mead at a draught. And again the queen mocked Sinfiotli. A third time she came to him. Before she offered the horn, she said, "This is the one who fears to take his drink like a man. What a Volsung heart he has!" Sinfiotli saw the hatred in her eyes, and her mockery could not make him take the mead from her. As before, Sigmund was standing by. But now he was weary of raising the horn, and he said to Sinfiotli, "Pour the drink through thy beard." He thought that Sigmund meant that he should pour the mead through his lips that were bearded and make trouble no more between him and the queen. But Sigmund did not mean that. He meant that he should pretend to drink and let the mead run down on the floor. Sinfiotli, not understanding what his comrade meant, took the horn from the queen and raised it to his lips and drank. And as soon as he drank, the venom that was in the drink went to his heart, and he fell dead in the hall of the Branstock. Oh, woeful was Sigmund for the death of his kinsman and his comrade. He would let no one touch his body. He himself lifted Sinfiotli in his arms and carried him out of the hall, and through the wood, and down to the seashore. And when he came to the shore, he saw a boat drawn up with a man therein. Sigmund came near to him and saw that the man was old and strangely tall. "I will take thy burthen from thee," the man said. Sigmund left the body of Sinfiotli in the boat, thinking to take a place beside it. But as soon as the body was placed in it, the boat went from the land without sail or oars. Sigmund, looking on the old man who stood at the stern, knew that he was not of mortal men, but was Odin, All-Father, the giver of the sword, Gram. Then Sigmund went back to his hall. His queen died, and in time he wed with Hjordis, who became the mother of Sigurd. And now Sigurd the Volsung, the son of Sigmund and Hjordis, rode the ways of the forest, the sword Gram by his side, and the golden helmet of the dragon's hoard above his golden hair. Bohild, in the house of flame. The forest ways led him on and up a mountainside. He came to a mountain summit at last, Hindfell, where the trees fell away, leaving a place open to the sky and the winds. On Hindfell was the house of flame. Sigurd saw the walls black and high, and all around them was a ring of fire. As he rode nearer, he heard the roar of the mounting and the circling fire. He sat on Grani, his proud horse, and for long he looked on the black walls and the flame that went circling around them. Then he rode Grani to the fire. Another horse would have been affrighted, but Grani remained steady under Sigurd. To the wall of fire they came, and Sigurd, who knew no fear, rode through it. Now he was in the courtyard of the hall. No stir was there of man or hound or horse. Sigurd dismounted and bade Grani be still. He opened a door, and he saw a chamber with hangings on, which was wrought the pattern of a great tree. A tree with 3 roots, and the pattern was carried across from one wall to the other. On a couch in the center of the chamber one lay in slumber. Upon the head was a helmet, and across the breast was a breastplate. Sigurd took the helmet off the head. Then over the couch fell a heap of woman's hair, wondrous, bright, gleaming hair. This was the maiden that the birds had told him of. He cut the fastenings of the breastplate with his sword, and he gazed long upon her. Beautiful was her face, but stern, like the face of one who subdues, but may not be subdued. Beautiful and strong were her arms and her hands. Her mouth was proud, and over her closed eyes there were strong and beautiful brows. Her eyes opened, and she turned them and looked full upon Sigurd. "Who art thou who hast awakened me?" she said. "I am Sigurd, the son of Sigmund, of the Volsung race," he answered. "And thou didst ride through the ring of fire to me?" "That did I." She knelt on the couch and stretched out her arms to where the light shone. "Hail, O day!" she cried, "and hail, O beams that are the sons of day! O night, and O daughter of night, may ye look on us with eyes that bless. Hail, O Aesir, and O Esinia! Hail, O wide-spreading fields of Midgard! May ye give us wisdom, and wise speech, and healing power, and grant that nothing untrue or unbrave may come near us." All this she cried with eyes open wide. They were eyes that had in them all the blue that Sigurd had ever seen. The blue of flowers, the blue of skies, the blue of battle blades. She turned those great eyes upon him, and she said, "I am Brynhild, once a Valkyrie, but now a mortal maiden, one who will know death and all the sorrows that mortal women know. But there are things that I may not know, things that are false and of no bravery. She was the bravest and the wisest and the most beautiful maiden in the world." Sigurd knew that it was so. He laid his sword Gram at her feet, and he said her name, Brynhild. He told her how he had slain the dragon, and how he had heard the birds tell of her. She rose from the couch and bound her wondrous hair on her head. In wonder he watched her. When she moved, it was as though she walked above the earth. They sat together, and she told him wonderful and secret things. And she told him, too, how she was sent by Odin from Asgard to choose the slain for his hall, Valhalla, and to give victory to those whom he willed to have it. And she told how she had disobeyed the will of All-Father, and how, for that, she was made outcast of Asgard. Odin put into her flesh the thorn of the tree of sleep, that she might remain in slumber until one who was the bravest of mortal men should waken her. Whoever would break the fastenings of the breastplate would take out the thorn of sleep. "Odin granted me this," she said, "that, as a mortal maid, I should wed none but him who is the bravest in the world, and so that none but him might come to me. All-Father put the fire ring round where I lay in slumber. And it is thou, Sigurd, son of Sigmund, who hast come to me. Thou art the bravest, and I think thou art the most beautiful too, like to Tyr, the god who wields the sword." She told him that whoever rode through the fire and claimed her as his wife, him she must wed. They talked to each other fondly, and the day flowed by them. Then Sigurd heard Grani, his horse, neigh for him again and again. He cried to Brynhild, "Let me go from the gaze of thine eyes. I am that one who is to have the greatest name in the world. Not yet have I made my name as great as my father, and my father's father made their names great. I have overcome King Ligni, and I have slain Fafnir the dragon. But that is little. I would make my name the greatest in the world, and endure all that is to be endured in making it so. Then I would come back to thee in the house of flame." Brynhild said to him, "Well dost thou speak. Make thy name great, and endure what thou hast to endure in making it so. I will wait for thee, knowing that none but Sigurd will be able to win through the fire that guards where I abide." They gazed long on each other, but little more they spoke. Then they held each other's hands in farewell, and they plighted faith, promising each other that they would take no other man or maiden for their mate. And for token of their troth, Sigurd took the ring that was on his finger and placed it on Brynhild's Andvari's ring it was. Sigurdi at the house of the Nibelungs. He left Heinfell, and he came into a kingdom that was ruled over by a people that were called the Nibelungs, as Sigurd's people were called the Volsungs. Juki was the name of the king of that land. Juki and his queen and all their sons gave a great welcome to Sigurd when he came to their hall, for he looked such a one as might win the name of being the world's greatest hero. And Sigurd went to war beside the king's sons, Gunnar and Hogni, and the three made great names for themselves, but Sigurd's shone high above the others. When they came back from that war, there were great rejoicings in the hall of the Nibelungs, and Sigurd's heart was filled with friendship. For all the Nibelung race, he had love for the king's sons, Gunnar and Hogni, and with Gunnar and Hogni he swore oaths of brotherhood. Henceforward he and they would be as brethren. King Juki had a stepson named Guttorm, and he was not bound in the oath that bound Sigurd and the others in brotherhood. After the war they had waged, Sigurd spent a whole winter in the hall of the Nibelungs. His heart was full of memories of Brynhild and of longings to ride to her in the house of flame, and to take her with him to the kingdom that King Juki would have given him. But as yet he would not go back to her, for he had sworn to give his brethren further help. One day, as he rode by himself, he heard birds talk to each other, and he knew the words they were saying. One said, "There is Sigurd, who wears the wondrous helmet that he took out of Fafnir's hoard." And the other bird said, "He knows not that by that helmet he can change his shape, as Fafnir changed his shape, and make him look like this creature or that creature, or this man or that man." And the third bird said, "He knows not that the helmet can do anything so wonderful for him." He rode back to the hall of the Nibelungs, and at the supper board he told them what he had heard the birds say. He showed them the wondrous helmet. Also he told them how he had slain Fafnir the dragon, and of how he had won the mighty hoard for himself. His two sworn brothers who were there rejoiced that he had such wondrous possessions. But more precious than the hoard, and more wondrous than the helmet, was the memory of Brynhild that he had. But of this he said no word. Grimhild was the name of the queen. She was the mother of Gunnar and Hogni and their half-brother Guttorm. And she and the king had one daughter whose name was Gudrun. Now Grimhild was one of the wisest of women, and she knew when she looked upon him that Sigurd was the world's greatest warrior. She would have him belong to the Nibelungs, not only by the oaths of brotherhood he had sworn with Gunnar and Hogni, but by other ties. And when she heard of the great hoard that was his, she had greater wish and will that he should be one with the Nibelungs. She looked on the helmet of gold and on the great armouring that he wore, and she made it her heart's purpose that Sigurd should wed with Gudrun, her daughter. But neither Sigurd nor the maiden Gudrun knew of Grimhild's resolve, and the queen, watching Sigurd closely, knew that he had a remembrance in his breast that held him from seeing Gudrun's loveliness. She had knowledge of spells and secret brews. She was of the race of Borghild, whose brew had destroyed Sinfiotli's life, and she knew that she could make a potion that would destroy the memory Sigurd held. She mixed the potion. Then one night, when there was feasting in the hall of the Nibelungs, she gave the cup that held the potion into the hands of Gudrun and bade her carry it to Sigurd. Sigurd took the cup out of the hands of the fair Nibelung maiden, and he drank the potion. When he had drunk it, he put the cup down, and he stood amongst the feasters like a man in a dream. And like a man in a dream, he went into his chamber, and for a day and a night afterwards he was silent, and his mind was astray. When he rode out with Gunnar and Hogni, they would say to him, "What is it thou hast lost, brother?" Sigurd could not tell them, but what he had lost was all memory of Brynhild the Valkyrie in the House of Flame. He saw Gudrun, and it was as though he looked upon her for the first time. Soft were the long tresses of her hair, soft were her hands. Her eyes were like woodflowers, and her ways and her speech were gentle. Yet was she noble in her bearing, as became a princess who would come into a kingdom. And from the first time she had seen him upon Grani, his proud horse, and with his golden helmet above his golden hair, Gudrun had loved Sigurd. At the season when the wild swans came to the lake, Gudrun went down to watch them build their nests. And while she was there, Sigurd rode through the pines. He saw her, and her beauty made the whole place change. He stopped his horse and listened to her voice as she sang to the wild swans, sang the song that Vorund made for Alvit, his swan bride. No more was Sigurd's heart empty of memory. It was filled with the memory of Gudrun, as he saw her by the lake when the wild swans were building their nests. And now he watched her in the hall, sitting with her mother embroidering, or serving her father or her brothers, and tenderness for the maiden kept growing in his heart. A day came when he asked Gunnar and Hogni, his sworn brethren, for Gudrun. They were glad as though a great fortune had befallen them, and they brought him before Juki the king and Grimhild the queen. It seemed as if they had cast off all trouble and care and entered into the prime of their life and power. So greatly did the king and the queen rejoice at Sigurd's becoming one with the Nibelungs through his marriage with Gudrun. When Gudrun heard that Sigurd had asked for her, she said to the queen, "Oh, my mother, your wisdom should have strengthened me to bear such joy. How can I show him that he is so dear to me? But I shall try not to show it, for he might deem that there was no sense in me, but sense to love him. So great a warrior would not care for such love. I would be with him as a battle maiden." Sigurd and Gudrun were wed, and all the kingdom that the Nibelungs ruled over rejoiced. And Queen Grimhild thought that though the effect of the potion she gave would wear away, his love for Gudrun would ever fill his heart, and that no other memory would be able to find a place there. Oh, Brynhild was one for Gunnar. Now that Sigurd had wed Gudrun, he was one with the Nibelungs. The hoard that was in Fafnir's cave he brought away, and he left it in their treasure house. He went into his foster father's kingdom again, and he saw King Alvor and Hiordis, his mother. But he had no memory now of the House of Flame, nor of Brynhild who waited there for him. King Juki died, and Gunnar, Sigurd's sworn brother, became king in his stead. His mother would have him wed, but Gunnar told her he had seen no maiden whom he would choose for his wife. But when Sigurd and he were together, Gunnar would speak of a maiden far away, one whom he often thought on. And one day, when Sigurd pressed him to tell who this maiden was, he spoke of one whom the wisest of the poets told of. A maiden in a hall with a flame around it, a maiden named Brynhild who was guarded by a ring of fire. Sigurd laughed to think that his shrewd brother was beguiled by one whom he had only heard of. But if he was beguiled by the tale of her, why should he not come to her and wed her? "So," Sigurd said. Then Gunnar bent to him and asked, Sigurd, would he aid him to win her? And Sigurd took Gunnar's hand and swore that he would. So they started off for Heinfell, Gunnar and Hogni and Sigurd. They rode on until they came in sight of the black walls with the mounting and circling fire around them. No memory had Sigurd of the place. With the flame of eagerness upon his stolid face, Gunnar went forward to ride through the ring of fire. He brought Goti, his horse, near the flame, but the horse, for no urging, would go through it. Then Gunnar thought that, mounted on Grani, Sigurd's horse, he could ride through the ring of fire. He mounted Grani and came near to the flaring wall. But Grani, knowing that the one who rode him had fear of the fire, reared up and would not go through it. Only with Sigurd on his back would Grani go through the flame. Then were the three sworn brethren greatly discomfited. But after they had considered it for long, Hogni, the wise said, There is a way to win Brynhild, and that is for Sigurd to change shapes by the magic of his helmet with Gunnar. Then Sigurd could ride Grani through the wall of flame and come to Brynhild in Gunnar's shape. So spoke Hogni the wise, and when he saw his sworn brother's gaze fixed on him in pleading, Sigurd could not but agree to ride through the flame and come to Brynhild in the way he said. And so, by the magic of his helmet, he changed shapes with Gunnar. Then he mounted Grani and rode to the wall of flame. And Grani, knowing that the one he bore was without fear, rode through the flaring fire. Then Sigurd came into the courtyard of the House of Flame. He dismounted from Grani, and he bade his horse be still. He went within the hall, and he saw one with a bow in her hands, shooting at a mark. She turned to him, and he saw a beautiful and stern face, with coils of wondrous bright gleaming hair, and eyes that were like stars in an unventured-in sea. He thought that the arrow in her hands had been shot through him. But it was not so. Brynhild threw down the bow, and came to him with that walk of hers that was as of one moving above the earth. And when she came near and looked upon him, she uttered a strange cry. "Who art thou?" she said. "Who art thou? Who hast come to me through the wall of flaring fire?" "Gunnar, son of Juki, of the race of the Nibelungs," Sigurd said. "Art thou the bravest one in the world?" she asked. "I have ridden through the wall of flaring fire to come to thee," Sigurd answered. "He who has come through that wall of flaring fire may claim me," Brynhild said. "It is written in the runes, and it must be so. But I thought there was only one who would come to me through it." She looked at him, and her eyes had a flame of anger. "Oh, I would strive with thee with warrior weapons," she cried. Then Sigurd felt her strong hands upon him, and he knew that she was striving to throw him. They wrestled, and each was so strong that none could move the other. They wrestled, Sigurd the first of heroes and Brynhild the Valkyrie. Sigurd got her hand in his in the wrestle. On that hand was a ring, and Sigurd bent back the finger and drew it off. It was Anvari's ring, the ring he had placed on her finger. And when the ring was taken off it, Brynhild sank down on her knees like one that was strengthless. Then Sigurd lifted her in his arms and carried her to where Grani, his horse, was waiting. He lifted her across his horse, and he mounted behind her, and again he rode through the wall of flame. Hogni and Gunnar were waiting, Gunnar in Sigurd's shape. Brynhild did not look upon them, but covered her face with her hands. Then Sigurd took back his own shape, and he rode before Gunnar and Hogni to the hall of the Nibelungs. He went within, and he found Gudrun, his wife, playing with Sigmund, his little son, and he sat beside her, and he told her of all that had befallen, how, for the sake of the sworn brotherhood, he had won Brynhild the Valkyrie for Gunnar, and how he had striven with her and had overcome her, and had taken off her finger the ring that he now wore upon his own. And even as he spoke to his wife, the fume of the potion that Gudrun's mother had given him was wearing off, and he had memories of going to the House of Flame on a day that was not this day, and of riding through the wall of fire in his own shape. And again, as on the night when he drank the potion that Queen Grimhild brewed, he became as one whose wits are astray. He stood watching his child as he played, and his wife, as she worked at her embroidery, and he was as a man in a dream. While he was standing there, Gunnar and Hogni came into the hall of the Nibelungs, bringing Brynhild with them. Gudrun rose up to welcome her, who came as her brother's bride. Then did Sigurd look on Brynhild, and then did he remember all. And when he remembered all, such a mighty sigh rose from his heart as burst the links of the mail that was across his breast. The death of Sigurd. It happened one day that Brynhild, Gunnar's wife, now a queen, was with Sigurd's wife, bathing in a river. Not often they were together. Brynhild was the haughtiest of women, and often she treated Gudrun with disdain. Now, as they were bathing together, Gudrun, shaking out her hair, cast some drops upon Brynhild. Brynhild went from Gudrun. And Sigurd's wife, not knowing that Brynhild had anger against her, went after her up the stream. "Why dost thou go so far up the river, Brynhild?" Gudrun asked. "So that thou mayst not shake thy hair over me," answered Brynhild. Gudrun stood still while Brynhild went up the river like a creature who was made to be alone. "Why dost thou speak so to me, sister?" Gudrun cried. She remembered that from the first Brynhild had been haughty with her, often speaking to her with harshness and bitterness. She did not know what cause Brynhild had for this. It was because Brynhild had seen in Sigurd the one who had ridden through the fire for the first time, he who had awakened her by breaking the binding of her breastplate, and so drawing out of her flesh the thorn of the tree of sleep. She had given him her love when she awakened on the world, but he, as she thought, had forgotten her easily, giving his love to this other maiden. Brynhild, with her Valkyrie's pride, was left with a mighty anger in her heart. "Why dost thou speak so to me, Brynhild?" Gudrun asked. "It would be ill indeed if drops from thy hair fell on one who is so much above thee, one who is King Gunnar's wife," Brynhild answered. "Thou art married to a king, but not to one more valorous than my lord," Gudrun said. "Gunnar is more valorous. Why dost thou compare Sigurd with him?" Brynhild said. "He slew the dragon Fafnir, and won for himself Fafnir's hoard," said Gudrun. Gunnar rode through the ring of fire. "Mayhap thou wilt tell us that Sigurd did the like," said Brynhild. "Yea," said Gudrun, now made angry. "It was Sigurd and not Gunnar who rode through the ring of fire. He rode through it in Gunnar's shape, and he took the ring off thy finger. Look, it is now on mine." And Gudrun held out her hand on which was Andvari's ring. Then Brynhild knew all at once that what Gudrun said was true. It was Sigurd that rode through the ring of fire the second as well as the first time. It was he who had struggled with her, taking the ring off her hand and claiming her for a bride, not for himself, but for another, and out of disdain. Falsely had she been won. And she, one of Odin's Valkyries, had been wed to one who was not the bravest hero in the world, and she, to whom untruth might not come, had been deceived. She was silent now, and all the pride that was in her turned to hatred of Sigurd. She went to Gunnar, her husband, and she told him that she was so deeply shamed that she could never be glad in his hall again, that never would he see her drinking wine, nor embroidering with golden threads, and never would he hear her speaking words of kindness. And when she said this to him, she rent the web she was weaving, and she wept aloud, so that all in the hall heard her, and all marvelled to hear the proud queen cry. Then Sigurd came to her, and he offered in atonement the whole hoard of Fafnir. And he told her how forgetfulness of her had come upon him, and he begged her to forgive him for winning her in falseness. But she answered him, "Too late, thou hast come to me, Sigurd. Now I have only a great anger in my heart." When Gunnar came, she told him she would forgive him and love him as she had not loved him before, if he would slay Sigurd. But Gunnar would not slay him, although Brynhild's passion moved him greatly, since Sigurd was a sworn brother of his. Then she went to Hogni and asked him to slay Sigurd, telling him that the whole of Fafnir's hoard would belong to the Nibelungs if Sigurd was slain. But Hogni would not slay him, since Sigurd and he were sworn brothers. There was one who had not sworn brotherhood with Sigurd. He was Guttorm, Gunnar's and Hogni's half-brother. Brynhild went to Guttorm. He would not slay Sigurd, but Brynhild found that he was infirm of will and unsteady of thought. With Guttorm, then, she would work for the slaying of Sigurd. Her mind was fixed that he and she would no longer be in the world of men. She made a dish of madness, for Guttorm's serpent's venom and wolf's flesh mixed, and when he had eaten it, Guttorm was crazed. Then did he listen to Brynhild's words, and she commanded him to go into the chamber where Sigurd slept and stab him through the body with a sword. This Guttorm did. But Sigurd, before he gasped out his life, took Gram, his great sword, and flung it at Guttorm and cut him in twain. And Brynhild, knowing what deed was done, went without and came to where Grani, Sigurd's proud horse, was standing. She stayed there with her arms across Grani's neck, the Valkyrie leaning across the horse that was born of Odin's horse, and Grani stood listening for some sound. He heard the cries of Gudrun over Sigurd, and then his heart burst, and he died. They bore Sigurd out of the hall, and Brynhild went beside where they placed him. She took a sword and put it through her own heart. Thus died Brynhild, who had been made a mortal woman for her disobedience to the will of Odin, and who was won to be a mortal's wife by a falseness. They took Sigurd and his horse Grani, and his helmet, and his golden war gear, and they left all on a great painted ship. They could not but leave Brynhild beside him, Brynhild with her wondrous hair and her stern and beautiful face. They left the two together and launched the ship on the sea. And when the ship was on the water, they fired it, and Brynhild once again lay in the flames. And so Sigurd and Brynhild went together to join Baldur and Nanna in Hela's habitation. Gunnar and Hogni came to dread the evil that was in the hoard. They took the gleaming and glittering mass, and they brought it to the river along which, ages before, Hreidmar had his smithy and the dwarf Onvari his cave. From a rock in the river they cast the gold and jewels into the water, and the hoard of Anvari sank forever beneath the waves. Then the river maidens had possession again of their treasure. But not for long were they to guard it and to sing over it. For now the season that was called the Fimbul winter was coming over the earth, and Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, was coming to the dwellers in Asgard. The twilight of the gods. Snow fell on the 4 quarters of the world, icy winds blew from every side, the sun and the moon were hidden by storms. It was the Fimbul winter. No spring came and no summer, no autumn brought harvest or fruit, and winter grew into winter again. There was 3 years' winter. The first was called the Winter of Winds. Storms blew, and snows drove down, and frosts were mighty. The children of men might hardly keep alive in that dread winter. The second winter was called the Winter of the Sword. Those who were left alive amongst men robbed and slew for what was left to feed on. Brother fell on brother and slew him, and over all the world there were mighty battles. And the third winter was called the Winter of the Wolf. Then the ancient witch, who lived in Jarnvid, the iron wood, fed the wolf Managam on unburied men and on the corpses of those who fell in battle. Mightily grew and flourished the wolf, that was to be the devourer of Mani, the moon. The champions in Valhalla would find their seats splashed with the blood that Managam dashed from his jaws. This was a sign to the gods that the time of the last battle was approaching. A cock crew, far down in the bowels of the earth he was, and beside Hela's habitation, the rusty red cock of Hel crew, and his crowing made a stir in the lower worlds. In Jotunheim a cock crew, Fjalar, the crimson cock, and at his crowing the giants aroused themselves. High up in Asgard a cock crew, the golden cock Gullingkambir, and at his crowing the champions in Valhalla bestirred themselves. A dog barked. Deep down in the earth a dog barked. It was Garm, the hound with bloody mouth, barking in Nipper's cave. The dwarfs who heard groaned before their doors of stone. The tree Yggdrasil moaned in all its branches. There was a rending noise as the giants moved their ship. There was a trampling sound as the hosts of Muspelheim gathered their horses. But Jotunheim and Muspelheim and Hel waited tremblingly. It might be that Fenrir the wolf might not burst the bonds wherewith the gods had bound him. Without his being loosed, the gods might not be destroyed. And then was heard the rending of the rock as Fenrir broke loose. For the second time the hound Garm barked in Nipper's cave. Then was heard the galloping of the horses of the riders of Muspelheim. Then was heard the laughter of Loki. Then was heard the blowing of Heimdall's horn. Then was heard the opening of Valhalla's 540 doors, as 800 champions made ready to pass through each door. Odin took counsel with Mimir's head. Up from the waters of the well of wisdom he drew it, and by the power of the runes he knew he made the head speak to him. Where best might the Aesir and the Vanir and the Einherjar, who were the champions of Midgard, meet, and how best might they strive with the forces of Muspelheim and Jotunheim and Hel? The head of Mimir counselled Odin to meet them on Vigard plain and to wage there such war that the powers of evil would be destroyed forever, even though his own world should be destroyed with them. The riders of Muspelheim reached Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge. Now would they storm the city of the gods and fill it with flame. But Bifrost broke under the weight of the riders of Muspelheim, and they came not to the city of the gods. Jörmungand, the serpent that encircles the world, reared itself up from the sea. The waters flooded the lands, and the remnant of the world's inhabitants was swept away. That mighty flood floated Naglfar, the ship of nails that the giants were so long building, and floated the ship of Hel also, with Hreimr the giant steering it. Naglfar sailed against the gods with all the powers of Jotunheim aboard, and Loki steered the ship of Hel with the wolf Fenrir upon it for the place of the last battle. Since Bifrost was broken, the Aesir and the Vanir, the Aesir and the Vana, the Einherjar and the Valkyries rode downward to Vigard through the waters of Thund. Odin rode at the head of his champions. His helmet was of gold, and in his hand was his spear Gungnir. Thor and Tyr were in his company. In Myrkvid, the dark forest, the Vanir stood against the host of Muspelheim. From the broken end of the Rainbow Bridge the riders came, all flashing and flaming, with fire before them and after them. Njord was there with Skadi, his giant wife, fierce in her war dress. Freya was there also, and Frey had Gerda beside him as a battle maiden. Terribly bright flashed Surtur's sword. No sword ever owned was as bright as his, except the sword that Frey had given to Skirnir. Frey and Surtur fought. He perished. Frey perished in that battle, but he would not have perished if he had had in his hand his own magic sword. And now, for the third time, Garm, the hound with blood upon his jaws, barked. He had broken loose on the world, and with fierce bounds he rushed toward Vigard Plain, where the gods had assembled their powers. Loud barked Garm. The eagle Harsfelga screamed on the edge of heaven. Then the skies were cloven, and the tree Yggdrasil was shaken in all its roots. To the place where the gods had drawn up their ranks came the ship of Jotunheim, and the ship of Hel came the riders of Muspelheim, and Garm, the hound with blood upon his jaws. And out of the sea that now surrounded the plain of Vigard, the serpent Jörmungand came. What, said Odin to the gods and to the champions who surrounded him? We will give our lives and let our world be destroyed, but we will battle so that these evil powers will not live after us. Out of Hel's ship sprang Fenrir the wolf. His mouth gaped, his lower jaw hung against the earth, and his upper jaw scraped the sky. Against the wolf Odin, All-Father fought. Thor might not aid him, for Thor had now to encounter Jörmungand, the monstrous serpent. By Fenrir the wolf, Odin was slain. But the younger gods were now advancing to the battle, and Vidar, the silent god, came face to face with Fenrir. He laid his foot on the wolf's lower jaw. That foot that had on the sandal made of all the scraps of leather that shoemakers had laid by for him, and with his hands he seized the upper jaw and tore his gullet. Thus died Fenrir, the fiercest of all the enemies of the gods. Jörmungand, the monstrous serpent, would have overwhelmed all with the venom he was ready to pour forth. But Thor sprang forward and crushed him with a stroke of his hammer. Mjolnir! Then Thor stepped back 9 paces. But the serpent blew his venom over him, and blinded and choked and burnt, Thor, the world's defender, perished. Loki sprang from his ship and strove with Heimdall, the warder of the Rainbow Bridge and the watcher for the gods. Loki slew Heimdall and was slain by him. Bravely fought Tyr, the god who had sacrificed his sword hand for the binding of the wolf. Bravely he fought, and many of the powers of evil perished by his strong left hand. But Garm, the hound with bloody jaws, slew Tyr, and now the riders of Muspelheim came down on the field. Bright and gleaming were all their weapons. Before them and behind them went wasting fires. Surtur cast fire upon the earth. The tree Yggdrasil took fire and burned in all its great branches. The world tree was wasted in the blaze. But the fearful fire that Surtur brought on the earth destroyed him and all his host. The wolf Hati caught up on Sol. The sun, the wolf Manigam seized on Mani, the moon, they devoured them, stars fell, and darkness came down on the world. The seas flowed over the burnt and wasted earth, and the skies were dark above the sea, for Sol and Mani were no more. But at last the seas drew back, and earth appeared again, green and beautiful. A new sun and a new moon appeared in the heavens, one a daughter of Sol, and the other a daughter of Mani. No grim wolves kept them in pursuit. 4 of the younger gods stood on the highest of the world's peaks. They were Vidar and Vali, the sons of Odin, and Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor. Modi and Magni found Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and with it they slew the monsters that still raged through the world, the hound Garm and the wolf Manigam. Vidar and Vali found in the grass the golden tablets on which were inscribed the runes of wisdom of the elder gods. The runes told them of a heaven that was above Asgard, of Gimli, that was untouched by Surtur's fire. Vili and Vi, will and holiness, ruled in it. Baldur and Hedor came from Hela's habitation, and the gods sat on the peak together and held speech with each other, calling to mind the secrets and the happenings they had known before, Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Deep in a wood, 2 of humankind were left. The fire of Surtur did not touch them. They slept, and when they wakened, the world was green and beautiful again. These 2 fed on the dews of the morning. A woman and a man they were, Leif and Leifthrasia. They walked abroad in the world, and from them and from their children came the men and women who spread themselves over the earth. The end.